That's why I asked you to pay back the money you owe. My husband suddenly left me with a big debt and vanished. I tried to reach him, but he didn't respond. What should I do now? I can't afford to pay off such a huge debt on my own. Thankfully, my daughter was there to support me when I felt lost. Mom, don't worry, she said. I'm Kate, 35 years old, working part-time and taking care of the house. My husband's name is Ruggin, and we have a daughter. Rogan and I met at a social event where I was feeling nervous, but he approached me and made me feel comfortable. We hit it off and exchanged contact details. As we kept talking, I started feeling something special for Rogan. Soon enough, we began dating. Who would have guessed I'd end up dating someone I met at a mixer? After our first date, I told my older sister Talia about Rogan. She burst into laughter, saying, "Really? I never imagined you'd find a boyfriend at a mixer. I thought you'd date someone from work or something." I've always been shy and not great at socializing. Even as an adult, I rarely went to parties. It's quite a surprise, isn't it? You only went to help out, right? Exactly. When I showed Talia a photo from our date, she said, "He's surprisingly good looking." After catching up, we said goodbye for the day. Talia is still single and seems content with it, not really interested in getting married or having a boyfriend. While I respect her choice, I'm excited about my future with Rogan. If things go well and we get married and have kids, that would be wonderful. On my way home, I couldn't help but smile. A few years later, Rogan and I got married. I remember his proposal so clearly. It was such an emotional moment. I couldn't stop crying tears of joy. Moving into our new apartment marked the beginning of our life together as a married couple. We used to live apart, so being with Rogan every day felt like a dream come true. Even though our work schedules were different, we made sure to have dinner together, sleep side by side, and cherish every moment. On our days off, we'd relax at home or go for drives, enjoying each other's company. The arrival of our daughter, Rhea, brought even more joy into our lives. She was so tiny and adorable. Her birth was an incredibly emotional experience that I'll never forget. Since Rita was born, I felt like I found true happiness. Our parents and relatives were thrilled too, sending us lots of gifts to celebrate. Just before Rhea was born, I quit my job to focus on taking care of my family. Rogan has always been supportive, helping with household chores and taking care of Rhea, even when he's tired. He'd often say, "I'll look after Rhea so you can rest." I'm grateful to have married such a wonderful person like him. Living with Rogan, who loves and cares for us so deeply, has been incredibly heartwarming. However, a few years down the line, I found myself regretting marrying Rogan deeply. Several years after Rhea was born, Rogan surprised me by resigning from his job. He explained that he had been struggling with a new boss, which had taken a toll on his mental health, leading him to quit. While I understood his reasons, I couldn't shake off the feeling of frustration. Why hadn't he discussed this with me beforehand? Our family relied on his income, so such a significant decision should have been made together. That was unexpected. "Have you thought about what's next?" I asked. "Don't worry, I'll figure it out," he replied vaguely. His response didn't ease my concerns, but I had no choice but to trust him. Luckily, Rogan found a new job relatively quickly. That's a relief. I thought about working too, but with Raya still young, I want to be there for her, I explained. "Is everything going well at the new job?" I asked. "Yeah, it's fine," he replied curtly. I sensed something was off, but I didn't want to push in further. So I handed Rhea to him and went to take a bath. A few days later, Rogan returned home looking downcast. As I tried to inquire about what had happened, memories of his previous abrupt resignation flooded my mind. Could it be that he had quit again so soon? Sadly, my suspicions were confirmed. "I quit my job," he admitted. "Why?" I asked. "I just couldn't get along with my coworkers, especially being bossed around by someone much younger," he explained. "I understand, but we'll get through this. We'll find another job, and I'll support you however I can." I reassured him. Suddenly, Rogan's demeanor changed, and he lashed out at me. Why do you look so displeased? You only eat because I work. You just stay at home and act all superior, he snapped, tossing his bag onto the table. Confused by his outburst, I asked, "What's wrong?" "Just shut up," he retorted angrily, grabbing a whiskey from the fridge and downing it in one go. I was taken aback by his behavior. I'd never seen him this upset before. I tried to calm him down, but he continued to vent his frustrations, eventually slumping onto the sofa in a sullen mood. I was shocked and hurt by his words, and our relationship suffered as a result. Since then, Rogan has been stuck in a cycle of finding and quitting jobs. We went through uncertain times and faced many anxious days. "Rogan, can't you take your job more seriously?" I tried to be understanding initially, but with everything going on, I couldn't stay silent any longer. "You're being unreasonable. If you're unhappy, then you should work and earn money. You rely on me too much." "But what about Raya? What about her?" Lately, Rogan seemed to be losing interest in Rhea and avoiding her. When Raya was born, he was so attentive and happy, but now he was like a different person. No matter how much I pleaded, he showed no interest in finding work. Eventually, I had to leave Rhea with Talia and start working myself. "I'm sorry to burden you with this," I told Talia. "It's okay. Rhea and I will be fine," she reassured me. Rhea had just started kindergarten, so leaving her with Talia wasn't too concerning. I trusted Talia to take care of her, and Rhea was surprisingly mature and calm for her age. She enjoyed reading newspapers and could write long sentences. Rhea was quiet and composed, and I worried if she would make friends at kindergarten. But she surprised me by making many friends and enjoying her time there. It was heartwarming to see as a parent. With Rhea settled in kindergarten and Talia looking after her, I felt confident about working outside the home. When I started job hunting, I was surprised to land one quicker than expected. So I began working full-time, and the pay was better than I had hoped for. Even if Rogan didn't have a job, our finances would likely be stable. Luckily, the work environment was pleasant, and despite the busy days, I enjoyed it. After a few years, Rogan finally found a stable job too. It seemed like he had found a workplace that suited him. I felt a huge sense of relief knowing this. Over time, Rogan's mood improved, and he started to resemble the man I married. He became more considerate of my work-life balance, asking if I was tired or if work was tough. I was surprised by his change. Maybe having a stable job gave him peace of mind. Rhea was growing up well, and Rogan became a caring father to her again. Seeing them play together always made me happy, but the thought of quitting my job and returning to the old ways made me anxious. So I continued to rely on Talia for childcare. "How's Rhea? Is she doing okay?" "Don't worry, she's happily playing," Talia reassured me. As long as Rhea was happy, I felt at ease. I still depended on Talia and had been thinking of treating her to something special to show my gratitude. Several years passed, and Rhea was now in the 3rd grade. She went to school every day with excitement. Our family remained close-knit and loving, just like before. I pondered over what had caused the previous strain between Rogan and me. Our home life now felt stable, as if past issues had been resolved. Then one day, Rogan suggested something unexpected. "Have you thought about getting a new car?" he asked. "A new car?" I replied, surprised. "Yes, our current one is reliable, but it's getting old. If it's becoming too costly to maintain," I agreed, realizing our car had been with us for a long time and repair expenses were mounting. "You might be right. Maybe it's time for a new one." "I thought you'd agree. I've already gathered some catalogs," he said. I didn't expect him to be so enthusiastic about it, but we began looking through the catalogs together. "Rhea, come here. Which car do you want to ride in? Let's choose together," Rogan called out to our daughter. The 3 of us enjoyed picking out a car together. Little did I know, this day would lead to unexpected events. A few months later, the new car arrived. It was a brand new model, costing over $155,000, and the loan was in my name. Normally, Rogan's name would be on such a loan, but given his job history, We feared rejection. I resolved to work even harder to pay off the loan, and I believed Rogan felt the same way. That's what I thought. But my hopes were crushed in an instant. Rogan stopped coming home, disappearing with the new car we had just bought. Did he get into some kind of trouble? What should I do? Just then, my phone rang. It was Rogan. Rogan, where are you? What's going on? I couldn't hide my concern. Relax, he said. You vanished out of nowhere, and the car is gone. Are you in trouble? I tried to explain how worried I had been, but Rogan laughed and dropped a bombshell. I found someone else. She's more important to me than you. What? What are you saying? I've fallen in love with someone else. I've already started the divorce process. Please don't interfere. Divorce? I can't believe this. I was stunned by the mention of divorce. But then I remembered a heated argument we had before. Filing for divorce meant we both agreed to end our marriage. I regretted letting my emotions get the best of me then. Oh, and I have a debt. You'll have to repay it, Rogan added casually. What? How much? Around $200,000. You'll handle the payments. With that, he hung up abruptly. I never imagined something like this could happen to me. Were all of his kind gestures just a facade? As these thoughts flooded my mind, I felt my strength drain away. Mom, what's wrong? Raya asked, rushing to my side with concern as I sank to the floor. It's okay, sweetheart. Thank you. I reassured her, trying to maintain a brave front even as anxiety gnawed at me. How would I manage with such a huge debt hanging over us? The thought of $200,000 weighed heavily on my mind, and then there was the car loan to worry about too. In a panic, I checked my bank balance, searching every nook and cranny for my ATM card, but it was nowhere to be found. Frantically, I checked my bank app on my phone and was horrified to see a significant decrease in my account balance, with no memory of making such withdrawals. Rogan was the only one who could have done this. I tried to reach him, but there was no response. It felt like my world was falling apart. With a blank mind, I resolved to focus on earning money. I decided to keep this burden a secret from Talia and Ria to spare them unnecessary worry. Weeks later, I collapsed at work due to extreme stress and woke up in a hospital bed, bewildered. Where am I? I asked weakly. Talia entered the room with Raya, her expression full of concern. It turned out I needed to stay in the hospital for several days for further tests. What should I do? I fretted. Let's discuss Rogan once you're discharged, Talia suggested gently. Raya then confessed that she had overheard Rogan's phone call, surprising me with her knowledge of the situation. As I prepared to leave the hospital, I couldn't shake the feeling of apprehension, worried that Talia might reprimand me for letting Raya in on the truth. The next day, I underwent various tests, which revealed that my poor health was due to cancer. Thankfully, it was still in the early stages, and there was hope for recovery through surgery. Although the surgery was successful, returning to work immediately seemed out of the question. With no savings and medical bills mounting, I felt overwhelmed. During this difficult time, Talia and Ria became my pillars of support. When Ria explained the situation to Talia, she was even more outraged than I had expected. Talia tried to track down Rogan to make him repay the debt and cover the medical expenses, but his whereabouts remained unknown. What should we do if we can't find Rogan? I wondered aloud. Talia then suggested an idea. What about the car that's in your name? Rogan has it, right? Maybe we can try to get it back. Is that even possible? I asked, surprised. Talia explained further. I found out where Rogan is currently working. Surprisingly, he's at a different company inside the same building where I work. Although I usually work remotely, I've seen him there on occasion. With this information, we can make a plan. Then let's go to Rogan's workplace right away, I suggested, eager to confront him. But Talia advised against rushing into things. We need a solid plan, not just a spontaneous approach, she cautioned. Ria and I have an idea, she continued. That's right, a plan? Raya confirmed, exchanging a smile with Talia. I couldn't quite grasp the significance of their demeanor. As I watched them silently, Rhea smiled reassuringly and said, "Don't worry, everything's taken care of." What kind of plan have they concocted? They didn't provide details, but everything became clear a month later while I was at Talia's house. Suddenly, a call came in. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was from Rogan. Initially, I ignored it, but it kept ringing persistently. Something must have gone wrong. Summoning my courage, I answered, and Rogan's frantic voice pleaded, "Please, help me. I'll explain later. Just come now. I'm in trouble, about to be arrested." He quickly shared his location and hung up. Talia and Rhea, who had overheard the conversation, finally unveiled their plan. We reported the car as stolen. "And it was Rhea's idea," Talia explained, beaming with pride. Rhea blushed and looked down, clearly grateful. I thanked them both profusely and rushed to where Rogan was waiting. The park he mentioned was surprisingly close to my home. Police officers were gathered around Rogan, questioning him. We hurried over to him. First, we explained the situation to the police officers and asked them to leave. Then, Rogan invited us into his car and began explaining what had happened. As I glanced inside the car, I noticed a confident-looking woman sitting boldly in the passenger seat, her legs crossed, staring at us with a cold gaze. "Thanks for coming, but why did the police show up?" Rogan asked, clearly perplexed. He had been surrounded and questioned by the police, yet he seemed unaware of their words. I was so shocked that I couldn't find the right words to respond. "I reported the car as stolen," I finally said. "After all, the car belongs to me. We're divorced, so there's no reason for you to be using my car. Reporting it stolen was the logical thing to do. You probably didn't expect to be accused of car theft." Rhea chimed in, addressing Rogan, who appeared shaken. "Dad, why did you leave us? Why won't you take responsibility for repaying the money? Explain yourself." Rogan sighed and looked at us with an exasperated expression, but he remained silent. "If you refuse to speak, I'll have to involve the police. Using my name without permission is a crime," I warned him sternly. At this, Rogan began to speak hesitantly, bit by bit. He opened up about his mistress, Lily, who had recently started working at the same company as Rogan. Their relationship began at a company welcome party and quickly turned romantic. Shockingly, Rogan discovered about 3 months ago that Lily was pregnant, evident from her growing stomach. "So you chose her over us and left?" I questioned, my tone sharp. Talia chimed in, interrupting Rogan's attempt to explain. She criticized his past actions, including his irresponsible behavior toward the family, frequent job changes, and quick temper. Rogan, seemingly lost in thought or simply ignoring Talia, remained silent, while Lily's irritation was evident. She pressed him about the $200,000 debt, but he stayed silent. Then Lily dropped a bombshell. He borrowed money in his wife's name to buy me luxury items. I was lucky. A $200,000 debt for gifts to Lily. What extravagances had he bought her? It was surprising how easily Lily revealed this information, considering it could incriminate them both if they were conspiring. As I pondered this, Rhea asked Lily about her pregnancy. "When are you due?" Lily replied, "In about 3 months." But the timeline didn't add up. She claimed to have been pregnant for 3 months, yet she was due in the same amount of time. Something didn't quite make sense. "Isn't the timing a bit off?" Talia noticed the inconsistency and questioned Lily further. "Is the baby really Rogan's? It seems strange for the due date to be in 3 months. Whose child is it?" Talia's suspicions were clear. Though taken aback, Lily didn't seem inclined to hide anything. "Actually, the child isn't Rogan's," she confessed. "I thought about keeping it secret, but dealing with him further seemed like too much hassle, so I decided to come clean." "Is that why you admitted to the debt as well?" Talia pressed. "Yeah, there's no point in sticking with Rogan anymore," Lily replied, her tone mocking. The atmosphere grew tense and uncomfortable. I wanted to leave immediately. Meanwhile, Rogan stared at Lily in disbelief. "What are you saying?" "This has to be a joke, right?" he exclaimed. "Why would it be a joke?" Lily retorted firmly. The tension escalated, making the air thick with unease. Talia took charge. "Anyway, I'm calling the police," she declared. Rogan and Lily protested, but Talia reminded them that borrowing money in my name was a crime, as was using the car without permission, especially since Rogan and I were no longer together. She instructed me to make the call, and despite their pleas, I did. Soon, the sound of sirens filled the air. It was a relief to know that they would face the consequences of their actions. The issues regarding the debt and the car would finally be resolved. In the end, Rogan and Lily faced legal repercussions. While they avoided prison, they were held accountable for compensation, repaying the debt, and child support. Despite attempts to lessen their obligations through legal means, Rita's secret recording served as damning evidence, leading to their requests being denied. Rita decided to record the conversation after being inspired by a scene from a TV show she watched with Talia. While I admired her quick thinking, I couldn't help but wonder about the content of the shows Talia exposed her to. Now Ria and I reside with Talia without any commuting issues for Raya's school, as our previous residence was conveniently close. The car was returned safely, and it appears Rogan is somehow managing the debt. If Rogan hadn't made those regrettable decisions, he wouldn't be facing such hardships now. Throughout this ordeal, Talia and Ria have been instrumental, and thanks to them, the situation is gradually resolving. I am determined to work hard for a peaceful life with the two of them from now on.
My greedy husband demanded that I give him my dream car and all my savings to clear his gambling debts. When I refused, he slapped me hard and yelled, "How dare you disobey my orders?" My mother-in-law also wanted me kicked out of the house. Secretly, I created a revenge plan, and the very next day, when they woke up, a horrific surprise awaited them. My name is Eleanor Carter, and there was a time when I thought my life was perfect. I had a loving husband, a beautiful home, and dreams for a future filled with happiness. But life has a way of pulling back the curtains, revealing truths you never wanted to see. I met Henry Carter during my last year at university. He was everything I thought I wanted: charming, attentive, and so full of promises. He told me I was the love of his life, the woman he had been waiting for. At 26, I believed him with my whole heart. We got married quickly, swept up in the whirlwind of romance, and I truly thought I had found my happily ever after. But things began to change the moment we moved into Henry's family home in Dallas. It wasn't my choice to live there, but Henry insisted. He said it was temporary, just until we saved up enough to buy a place of our own. What I didn't know was that his mother, Sylvia Carter, ruled that house, and Henry, like a tyrant. Sylvia was the kind of woman who always needed to be in control. She was in her mid-50s, an experienced real estate agent with a sharp tongue and an even sharper temper. From the start, she made it clear she didn't think I was good enough for her son. She criticized everything: my clothes, my cooking, even the way I spoke. "Henry deserves better," she'd say with a thin smile, as if I weren't even in the room. At first, I tried to be polite. I told myself it was just her way, that she'd warm up to me eventually. But she never did. Instead, her insults grew harsher, and her manipulation more obvious. She'd corner Henry whenever I wasn't around, filling his head with doubts about me. "Eleanor's too young to understand responsibility," she'd say. "She's holding you back." What hurt the most was how Henry reacted. He never stood up for me. Not once. Whenever Sylvia said something cruel, he'd look away, pretending not to hear. And when I confronted him about it, he'd shrug and say, "That's just how Mom is. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. Every word she said, every glare she threw my way, cut me deeper than I cared to admit. Still, I held on. I told myself things would get better. I loved Henry, and I believed that love would be enough to get us through. I was wrong. The breaking point came about 2 years into our marriage. Henry had always been a bit careless with money, but I didn't realize just how bad things had gotten. One night, he came home looking pale and nervous. I knew something was wrong. "We need to talk," he said, avoiding my eyes. He told me he had made some bad decisions, gambling, borrowing money from people he shouldn't have, and now he was in serious trouble. He owed tens of thousands of dollars, and the creditors were demanding payment. "I need your help, Eleanor," he said. "I'm asking you to sell your car and give me your savings. It's the only way we can fix this." I stared at him in disbelief. My car wasn't just a car, it was my dream, something I had worked so hard for. And my savings? That was supposed to be for our future, for the home we wanted to buy. How could he even ask me to give it all up to clean up his mess? "No," I said firmly. "I won't do it. I've already sacrificed so much, Henry. You need to take responsibility for your own actions." His face darkened. I'd never seen him like that before. "Don't you dare talk to me like that," he snapped. "I'm your husband. You're supposed to support me." "Support you?" I shot back. "All I've done is support you. But this is too much. You've let your mother walk all over me, and now you want me to fix your mistakes?" "No, Henry, I won't." And then it happened. He slapped me hard. The force of it knocked me back a step, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The shock, the pain, it was overwhelming. He didn't even apologize. He just stood there, his face a mix of anger and shame. I locked myself in the bathroom that night, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My cheek was red and swollen, but that wasn't what hurt the most. It was the betrayal, the realization that the man I thought I loved had become a stranger. A coward. Something inside me broke that night, but in its place, something new began to grow. A fire, a determination I didn't know I had. I wasn't going to let Henry or his mother destroy me. I was done being their victim. I made a decision right then and there. I would take back control of my life. And I would make them pay for everything they had done to me. After that night, something shifted in me. I was no longer the same Eleanor Carter who had tiptoed around Sylvia's insults or begged Henry for respect. I realized I couldn't count on anyone else to stand up for me. If I wanted my life back, I had to fight for it myself. And fight I would. In the days that followed, I acted like everything was normal. Henry's slap had shaken me to my core, but I didn't let him see that. He thought I'd forgiven him, or maybe he didn't care. Either way, I knew that if I wanted to get out of this mess, I had to play my cards carefully. The last thing I needed was for him or Sylvia to suspect what I was planning. I started small, gathering evidence piece by piece. Sylvia had always been boastful about her success in real estate. She loved to brag about her deals and connections, especially during her lavish dinner parties. What she didn't realize was how much she revealed when she was trying to impress her guests. One evening, while serving dessert, I overheard her talking about a creative accounting trick she used to avoid paying taxes on her commissions. "The IRS won't notice if you know how to shuffle things around," she said with a smirk, her wine glass in hand. I pretended not to hear, but my mind was racing. If Sylvia was involved in tax fraud, there had to be evidence somewhere. I started paying close attention to her office. Sylvia had a habit of leaving her paperwork scattered across her desk, and I made mental notes whenever I could. One day, while she was out at a showing, I managed to sneak into her office and take pictures of some of the documents. They didn't make much sense to me at the time, numbers and codes scribbled in margins, but I figured they'd be useful later. Meanwhile, I started documenting Henry's behavior. I knew it wasn't enough to expose Sylvia. I needed to show the world who Henry really was. Whenever he yelled or made threats, I recorded him on my phone. I took pictures of the bruises he left and saved copies of text messages where he blamed me for his problems. It was painful to relive those moments, but I knew they would be my armor when the time came to fight. I couldn't do this alone, though. That's when I reached out to Detective Marcus Hill. I had met him a few years ago through a friend, and I remembered him as someone who genuinely cared about justice. It was terrifying to tell him everything, the abuse, the fraud, the betrayal, but he listened patiently, taking notes as I poured my heart out. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But you need to be careful. People like Sylvia don't go down without a fight."
"I know," I said.
But I'm not scared of her anymore. With Marcus's guidance, I started building my case. He explained how we could use the evidence I'd gathered to trigger an investigation into Sylvia's business. He also encouraged me to file for divorce and press charges against Henry for domestic violence. It felt overwhelming at first, like I was standing at the base of a mountain I didn't know how to climb. But Marcus reminded me that I wasn't alone. "Step by step, Eleanor," he said. "We'll take them down together." The first step was leaking Sylvia's tax fraud to the authorities. I sent the photos of her documents to the IRS anonymously, along with a detailed letter explaining her schemes. I made sure to include just enough information to make them curious without revealing that I was the source. I didn't want Sylvia to suspect me, at least not yet. Next, I filed for divorce. That conversation with Henry was one of the hardest moments of my life. He looked at me with a mix of anger and disbelief as I handed him the papers. "You can't be serious," he said, his voice rising. "You're my wife. We're supposed to fix this together." "Fix this?" I said, my voice shaking. "You think I can fix this after everything you've done? You hit me, Henry. You let your mother treat me like dirt. You've lied, you've gambled, and you've ruined everything we had. I'm done." His response was cold and venomous. "You'll regret this, Eleanor. You think you're better than me? Let's see how far you get without me." I walked away from that conversation feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. But I wasn't done yet. Sylvia still had no idea what was coming, and I intended to keep it that way. While the IRS investigation unfolded, I worked closely with Marcus to ensure my evidence against Henry was solid. I wanted the world to see him for who he really was, a selfish, abusive man who didn't deserve the power he thought he had over me. I didn't know how long it would take for everything to come to light, but I was willing to wait. I had spent years suffering in silence, and I was done playing the victim. This time, I was in control. And I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to win. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. I knew that taking down Sylvia and Henry wouldn't happen overnight, but every piece of evidence I gathered brought me closer to my goal. The IRS had begun their investigation into Sylvia's real estate fraud, and though I didn't know the details, I could sense the tension growing in the house. Sylvia was on edge, snapping at everyone and spending hours locked in her office. She didn't know the source of the leak, but her paranoia was palpable. I played my role perfectly, acting as though I had no idea what was going on. To her, I was still the quiet, unremarkable daughter-in-law she could ignore. She had no idea that I was the one who had set everything in motion. As for Henry, he was unraveling faster than I expected. The divorce papers had shaken him, but the realization that I wasn't backing down seemed to hit him even harder. He tried every tactic to manipulate me, pleading, blaming, even threatening, but I refused to engage. Every conversation we had was another opportunity for me to gather evidence. One evening, Henry cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were bloodshot, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "You're ruining my life, Eleanor," he slurred. "Do you even care what you're doing to this family?" I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. "This family ruined itself, Henry. You and your mother made sure of that." He lunged toward me, his face twisted with anger, but I held my ground. I had learned not to fear him anymore. Instead, I calmly turned on my phone's recorder in my pocket, making sure to capture every word he said. "You think you're so clever," he sneered. "But you'll see. I'll make sure you regret this." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His threats were just empty words, and soon, he'd realized just how powerless he really was. The turning point came a week later. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, when Sylvia stormed in, her face red with anger. She held a stack of papers in her hand, documents from the IRS. "What is this?" she demanded, waving the papers at me. "Do you know anything about this, Eleanor?" I looked up, feigning confusion. "About what?" "This investigation," she shouted. "Someone reported my business. They're accusing me of fraud." I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone calm. "Why would I know anything about that, Sylvia? I'm not involved in your business." She glared at me, her suspicion obvious, but she couldn't prove anything. Not yet, anyway. I could feel the cracks in her composure, the fear creeping in. It was only a matter of time before her empire came crashing down. Meanwhile, Marcus kept me updated on the progress of the case against Henry. With the recordings, photos, and messages I had provided, we built a strong case for domestic violence and financial abuse. When the time was right, Marcus helped me file an official complaint, ensuring that Henry would be held accountable for his actions. The fallout was swift and brutal. News of Sylvia's fraud spread quickly, tarnishing her reputation in the real estate world. Her clients began pulling out of deals, and her business started to collapse under the weight of the investigation. The IRS seized her accounts, freezing her assets while they conducted their audit. For a woman who had built her life on power and control, it was the ultimate humiliation. Henry wasn't spared either. When I pressed charges against him, it became public knowledge. People who had once admired him as a successful accountant now saw him for what he truly was, a coward who preyed on those he claimed to love. His employer fired him, and his gambling debts continued to pile up, leaving him desperate and alone. But Sylvia wasn't ready to go down without a fight. In a last-ditch effort to save herself, she tried to frame me for her crimes. She claimed that I had tampered with her records, planting evidence to make her look guilty. It was a bold move, but I was ready for it. Marcus helped me gather proof that I had no access to her accounts or records beyond what I had documented from her own negligence. When her lies fell apart under scrutiny, it only solidified her guilt. The court issued a warrant for her arrest, and Sylvia was taken into custody, her once proud demeanor replaced with fear and shame. Henry, left with nothing, came crawling back to me. He showed up at my apartment one evening, his clothes wrinkled and his face hollow. "Eleanor," he said, his voice trembling, "I've lost everything. Please, I need your help." I stood in the doorway, looking at the man I had once loved. He was a shadow of himself, broken and desperate. But I felt no sympathy for him. He had chosen this path, and he had no one to blame but himself. "You made your choices, Henry," I said coldly, "and now you have to live with them. I won't let you drag me down with you." As I closed the door in his face, I felt a sense of closure. For the first time in years, I was free. When I closed the door on Henry that night, it felt like closing a chapter of my life I never wanted to revisit. For years, I had lived in fear, humiliation, and heartbreak, but those chains had finally broken. The Eleanor Carter, who once tiptoed around Sylvia's wrath and Henry's indifference, no longer existed. I was free, truly free for the first time. But my story didn't end there. Justice still needed to take its course, and I wasn't about to let Sylvia or Henry escape the consequences of their actions. Sylvia's trial was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Sitting in that courtroom, I watched as the evidence I had painstakingly gathered was laid out piece by piece. The documents, the testimonies, and the transactions, it all painted a damning picture of her fraud and corruption. Sylvia, of course, tried to play the victim. "This is a misunderstanding," she pleaded, her voice trembling with feigned innocence. "I've always conducted my business with integrity." The prosecutor wasn't having it. He presented the evidence so clearly, so meticulously, that even Sylvia's high-priced lawyer couldn't refute it. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts of tax fraud and embezzlement, there was no outburst, no dramatic scene. Sylvia simply slumped in her chair, defeated. She was sentenced to several years in prison, and her empire crumbled to dust. Henry's downfall was just as inevitable. The charges of domestic violence and financial abuse, coupled with his gambling debts, left him with no defense. His reputation was in tatters, and his friends had long abandoned him. When the judge handed down the ruling, a restraining order and mandatory counseling sessions, Henry didn't even look at me. He stared at the floor, a broken man stripped of his facade. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a sense of triumph I couldn't put into words. I had stood up to the people who had tried to destroy me, and I had won. But it wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. The months that followed were a time of rebuilding and rediscovery. I moved into a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a far cry from the oppressive luxury of the Carter mansion. I resumed teaching, pouring my energy into my students and finding joy in the small, everyday victories. My friend Marcus Hill, the detective who had helped me through it all, became a regular part of my life. His steady presence and encouragement reminded me that not everyone in this world is out to hurt you. One day, while tidying up my apartment, I stumbled upon an old journal I had kept before marrying Henry. Flipping through the pages, I saw a list of dreams I had written down: travel to Italy, start a garden, adopt a rescue dog. I smiled, realizing how far I had strayed from the person I once was. But now it was time to find her again. With the court proceedings behind me, I decided to treat myself to something I had long denied myself: a new car. Not just any car, but one I truly loved. It was my way of reclaiming the part of me Henry had tried to take. Driving down the open road in that shiny red convertible felt like freedom in its purest form. I also started therapy, something I had once dismissed as unnecessary. But talking to someone about the pain and trauma I had endured helped me more than I expected. My therapist, a kind and insightful woman named Dr. Lawson, helped me process my feelings and let go of the anger that had consumed me for so long. But the biggest change came in the form of an unexpected opportunity. Marcus introduced me to a nonprofit organization that supported women escaping abusive relationships. They were looking for a speaker, someone who could share their story and inspire others. At first, I hesitated. The thought of standing in front of strangers and bearing my soul terrified me. But Marcus reminded me of how far I had come, how much strength I had found within myself. So I agreed. My first speech was nerve-wracking, but as I stood on that stage, looking into the faces of women who had walked similar paths, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. Sharing my story wasn't just about helping others, it was about healing myself. Today, I look back on those years with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the pain I endured, but gratitude for the lessons it taught me. Sylvia and Henry tried to break me, but instead, they made me stronger. They forced me to find a resilience I didn't know I had, to fight for a future I never thought I could have. I still have scars, some visible, some not, but they're a reminder of how far I've come. I'm no longer Eleanor Carter, the quiet, unassuming wife. I'm Eleanor, a survivor, an advocate, and a woman who reclaimed her life against all odds. And as I sit here, pen in hand, writing the final words of my story, I can't help but smile. Because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. My selfish husband broke my trust by secretly giving his parents access to our joint business account, and they stole $50,000 to enjoy themselves. Their next plan was even more shocking, which I discovered when I read their secret conversations. The very next day, I took a bold step that metaphorically buried them alive. I've always believed in hard work and independence. From the time I was a little girl, growing up in Chicago, I knew I wanted to create something of my own. My grandmother, a seamstress, was my biggest inspiration. I used to sit by her side, watching her work tirelessly on her sewing machine, creating beautiful pieces from scraps of fabric. She used to tell me, "Anna, if you put your heart into something, you can create magic." Those words stuck with me, shaping who I became. Fast forward to my early 20s, I had just graduated with a degree in business, and I decided to follow in my grandmother's footsteps, not as a seamstress, but as a fashion entrepreneur. With a small loan and a lot of determination, I opened my boutique, Taylor's Threads, in the heart of Chicago. It wasn't much at first, a tiny space with a single display window, but I poured my soul into it. Slowly, word spread about my custom-made clothing and unique designs, and within a few years, my boutique became one of the most sought-after places for high-end, personalized fashion. By my late 30s, I had achieved what many people only dream of. Taylor's Threads was a thriving business with wealthy clients who appreciated the artistry and dedication behind every piece. I was proud of what I'd built. My life was full, busy, but fulfilling. The one thing I didn't have was someone to share it all with. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't unhappy being single. But sometimes, after a long day at work, I'd sit in my apartment, look at the city lights, and wonder if there was someone out there who'd understand me and my drive. That's when Ethan came into my life. We met at an art gallery opening, of all places. I remember how he introduced himself, confident but not arrogant, with a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. He was in his mid-40s, a financial consultant with a sharp sense of humor and an easygoing charm. Over the next few months, we got to know each other. Ethan seemed to admire my independence and my work ethic. He'd say things like, "I've never met someone as passionate and focused as you, Anna." It's inspiring. Hearing that felt like validation of everything I'd worked so hard for. We dated for about a year before he proposed. I was hesitant at first, not because I didn't love him, but because my business had always been my priority. Could I balance both? Ethan assured me he understood. "I'd never want to come between you and your dreams," he said. "I just want to be part of your life." It sounded perfect, didn't it? So I said yes. Our wedding was simple but beautiful, a small ceremony with close friends and family. That's when I met his parents, Helen and Frank. At first glance, they seemed like a sweet, retired couple. Helen was a retired school administrator, and Frank had worked as a mechanic before retiring early. They were warm and welcoming, doting on Ethan and eager to include me in their family. I didn't see the cracks back then, the subtle hints of control and entitlement. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. The first few months of married life were wonderful. Ethan moved into my apartment and we started sharing responsibilities. But things started to change when Helen and Frank began showing up unannounced. At first, it was just occasional visits, Helen bringing over a pie or Frank asking for advice on his car. But soon, it became a regular thing. Helen started offering suggestions for my boutique, most of which were out of touch with my brand. "You know, Anna," she'd say, "you should consider making more affordable pieces. Not everyone can afford those fancy dresses." I brushed it off as well-meaning advice, even when she started inviting her friends to the boutique and demanding discounts. I thought I was being kind, accommodating. What I didn't realize was that I was being taken advantage of. The first major red flag came about 6 months into our marriage. I'd been saving up to expand the boutique, maybe even open a second location. One day, while checking our joint account, I noticed a large withdrawal, $20,000. My heart sank. I immediately called Ethan. "Ethan," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "why is there $20,000 missing from our account?" There was a pause before he answered. "Oh, that," he said, sounding almost casual. "Mom and Dad were in a bit of a bind. They needed help paying off some debts, so I figured it was okay to use some of the money. It's our family, Anna. We help each other." I was stunned. That money was meant for the boutique. When I told him this, he looked genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry, Anna. I should have talked to you first. It won't happen again. I promise." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think it was just a mistake, a one-time thing. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. I told myself I was overthinking it, that Ethan loved me and wouldn't hurt me intentionally. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. But at that moment, I chose to trust him. After all, marriage is about trust, isn't it? I didn't realize how much trust could be broken. The thing about trust is that once it's shaken, it's hard to regain. After the $20,000 incident, I tried to move on, convincing myself that Ethan's mistake was a lapse in judgment and not a sign of something deeper. I buried myself in my work, expanding Taylor's threads and working on new designs for the upcoming fall collection. But it didn't take long for more cracks to appear. Helen's visits to the boutique became more frequent. She'd show up unannounced, offering her advice on how to run my business. "Anna," she'd say in that tone that made it sound like she was doing me a favor, "you should try offering group discounts. My bridge club would love that. Or, why don't you host a fashion show for the neighborhood? It could be a great way to connect with the community." At first, I politely declined, but Helen was persistent. She started inviting her friends to the boutique without asking me, promising them discounts or free alterations. I felt trapped. How do you say no to your mother-in-law without creating tension? I thought I was being gracious, but in hindsight, I was being walked all over. Then came the family fashion show. Helen proposed the idea casually one afternoon while we were having coffee. Anna, she said, I was thinking, why not host a fashion show at the boutique? We can invite some family and friends, and it'll be a fun way to showcase your work. I hesitated. Hosting an event like that would take time and resources, and it wasn't part of my business strategy. But Helen pressed on. It'll be good for the boutique, she said. And it's family. What's more important than that? Ethan chimed in, siding with his mother. It could be fun, Anna. And Mom's right, it might bring in more clients. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it was a harmless gesture. But when the day of the fashion show arrived, it was a disaster. Helen had invited over 50 people, most of them her friends, and they treated the boutique like a discount warehouse. They tried on clothes without asking, ignored the rules about handling custom pieces, and demanded family discounts on everything. I was mortified. The final straw that day was when Helen loudly announced, "Isn't Anna lucky to have a family like us to support hers?" I could barely keep the smile on my face as I watched her friends leave with armfuls of clothes, many of which were sold at prices that barely covered my costs. That night, I confronted Ethan. Ethan, this has to stop. Your parents are interfering with my business. Helen is treating the boutique like her personal playground. Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Anna, they're just trying to help. They don't mean any harm. Helps. I snapped. They're costing me money, Ethan. This isn't just about feelings. It's about my livelihood. He looked at me with those pleading eyes, the ones that made me feel guilty for even bringing it up. I'll talk to them, he said. I'll make sure they back off. But he didn't. Things only got worse. A few weeks after the fashion show, I noticed something strange when I logged into my boutique's business account. There was a withdrawal of $50,000, a staggering amount that I hadn't authorized. My heart pounded as I scrolled through the transactions, trying to make sense of it. That money was meant for payroll and inventory. Without it, the boutique could be in serious trouble. I called Ethan immediately. Ethan, I said, my voice shaking, did you take $50,000 from the business account? There was a long pause before he answered. Anna, it wasn't just me. Mom and Dad needed it. They were planning a trip to Europe and… Stop. I cut him off, my voice trembling with anger. You gave them access to my business account? Ethan, do you even realize what you've done? That money wasn't for vacations. It was for the boutique. Anna, calm down, he said, as if my anger was unreasonable. It's just money. We can make it back. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's not just money, Ethan. It's my hard work, my business. And you gave them access without even asking me? He tried to defend himself, saying it was family helping family again, but I couldn't listen. I hung up and spent the rest of the night trying to figure out how to cover the boutique's expenses. The next day, I confronted Helen. Why did you think it was okay to take $50,000 from my business account? I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. Helen didn't even flinch. Oh, Anna, don't be so dramatic, she said. Ethan said it was fine. And besides, you're doing so well. What's a little bit of money? We're family after all. Her casual dismissal of my hard work was like a slap in the face. But the worst was yet to come. A week later, I stumbled upon an email exchange between Helen and Ethan. My stomach turned as I read the messages. Helen had convinced Ethan to marry me, not because he loved me, but because she saw my boutique as a goldmine for their family. She referred to me as the jackpot and discussed ways they could benefit from my success. I sat there in shock, the words blurring on the screen. The man I thought loved me had been complicit in his parents' schemes all along. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. My marriage wasn't built on love, it was built on manipulation. I knew I couldn't let them get away with this. But I also knew I had to be smart about it. They had underestimated me, thinking I was too trusting, too naive. They were wrong. When you find out the people closest to you have betrayed you, it's like the ground beneath your feet vanishes. That's how I felt after reading those emails. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about everything, my trust, my marriage, my dignity. Ethan and his parents had been manipulating me from the start, seeing me as nothing more than a way to fund their lifestyle. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I sat there, staring at my laptop, my mind racing. I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The first thing I did was secure my business. I went to my bank the very next morning and removed Ethan's name from all the accounts. I froze every joint credit card and set up new passwords for all my accounts. It felt like I was reclaiming something they had stolen from me, control. Then I hired a lawyer. I explained everything. The unauthorized withdrawals, the emails, and even Helen's blatant interference in my business. My lawyer was sharp, and her eyes narrowed as I laid out the details. "We have a case," she said firmly. "But you'll need evidence to back all this up." That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. If Helen and Frank had been this bold with me, I wondered what other schemes they'd been involved in. I needed to know everything. The investigator worked quickly. Within weeks, he uncovered a web of deceit. Helen and Frank had been living far beyond their means for years. They had maxed out credit cards, taken out loans they couldn't repay, and even falsified documents to cover their tracks. They'd done it all under the guise of being a sweet, retired couple, relying on people like me to foot the bill. I also discovered that Helen had been bad-mouthing me to Ethan behind my back, calling me cold and selfish whenever I tried to set boundaries. She'd manipulated him into thinking he was doing the right thing by siding with her. And Ethan? He'd let her. He'd let her destroy the trust in our marriage because he was too weak to stand up to her. But what hurt the most was realizing how long this had been going on. Helen had convinced Ethan to marry me not because he loved me, but because she saw my boutique as a gold mine. I was nothing more than a means to an end for them. I decided to confront them all at once. I didn't want this to drag on. I wanted it over. So, I invited Ethan, Helen, and Frank to the boutique after hours, saying I had something important to discuss. When they arrived, Helen was all smiles, acting like she owned the place. "Anna, darling, what's all this about?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I didn't waste time. I handed them copies of the emails, the bank statements, and the investigator's report. "This is what it's about," I said, my voice steady. Ethan's face paled as he scanned the documents. Helen, however, barely blinked. "Anna, you're overreacting," she said, waving the papers dismissively. "We're family. Families share things." "Family?" I said, my voice rising. "You've lied to me, stolen from me, and treated my business like your personal ATM. You don't get to call this family." Frank tried to jump in. "Now hold on, Anna. Let's not make this bigger than it is." "Bigger than it is?" I snapped, my anger finally breaking through. "You drained $50,000 from my business account. You manipulated Ethan into marrying me for my money. This isn't a misunderstanding. It's fraud." Ethan looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Anna, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I love you." I laughed bitterly. "Love? Is that what you call this? Love doesn't scheme. Love doesn't lie. You chose them over me every single time." Helen's sweet facade cracked then. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she snapped. "We did what we had to do. And you're not exactly innocent. You let us in. Don't act like you didn't benefit from having us around." I stared at her, stunned by the audacity. "Benefit? All you've done is take. But that ends today." I took a deep breath and said the words I'd been holding on to. "I'm filing for divorce, and I'm pressing charges. I've already spoken to my lawyer, and I have all the evidence I need. You're going to pay back every penny you stole." The room fell silent. For the first time, Helen looked nervous. Frank shifted uncomfortably, and Ethan just stood there, his head hanging. Helen tried one last time. "Anna, be reasonable. Think about what this will do to Ethan." "I am thinking about Ethan," I said coldly. "And this is the best thing I can do for him. Cut him loose." I walked out of the boutique, leaving them behind to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in months. I wasn't done yet. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control. I walked out of my boutique that night feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I knew the battle wasn't over yet. Confronting Ethan, Helen, and Frank was just the beginning. There were legal matters to settle, financial messes to clean up, and my life to rebuild. The very next day, I met with my lawyer to finalize the divorce papers and file charges for financial fraud. The evidence I had collected was overwhelming: emails, bank statements, the investigator's report. My lawyer assured me we had a strong case. "They won't be able to talk their way out of this," she said with confidence. Of course, Helen didn't go down quietly. She tried everything to manipulate the situation. She left me countless voicemails, switching between apologies and veiled threats. "Anna, think about what you're doing," one message said. "Do you really want to ruin Ethan's life? And what about us? We're family." But I didn't respond. I was done being her pawn. Ethan, on the other hand, showed up at my apartment one evening, looking disheveled and desperate. "Anna, please," he said as I opened the door. "Can we talk? I made a mistake. I let my parents get in the way, but I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I looked at him, trying to see the man I had fallen in love with, but all I could see was someone who had betrayed me. "Ethan," I said, my voice calm but firm, "you didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice, over and over again. You chose them over me, over our marriage. And now you have to live with the consequences." He pleaded with me for what felt like hours, but my decision was final. I handed him the divorce papers and told him to leave. Over the next few months, the legal process played out. Helen and Frank tried to downplay their actions, claiming they didn't know what they were doing was wrong. But the evidence spoke for itself. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. They were ordered to repay the money they had stolen, and while it wouldn't happen overnight, knowing they were being held accountable was enough for me. Ethan didn't contest the divorce. I think, deep down, he knew there was no salvaging what we had. I made sure to cut all ties, blocking his number, and ensuring he had no access to my accounts or my life. With the legal matters behind me, I turned my focus back to Taylor's threads. My boutique had suffered during the chaos, but I was determined to bring it back stronger than ever. I introduced a new line of sustainable fashion, inspired by my grandmother's philosophy of creating beauty from simplicity. The response was incredible. My loyal clients returned, and new ones came flocking in. But it wasn't just about the boutique. I was rediscovering myself, the person I had been before Ethan and his family entered my life. I found joy in the little things again, experimenting with new designs, spending quiet evenings with a good book, and even taking long walks along the Chicago River. One evening, as I was scrolling through glowing reviews of my new collection, I got a call from my lawyer. "Anna," she said, "I thought you'd like to know that Helen and Frank's accounts have been frozen due to unpaid debts. They're officially bankrupt." I didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just relief. They could no longer manipulate anyone else the way they had manipulated me. The final chapter of this ordeal came a few months later. I had been invited to speak at a fashion event in New York, sharing my journey as a boutique owner. After the event, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe, reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the woman I had been when I met Ethan, driven, independent, but maybe a little too trusting. And I thought about the woman I had become, stronger, wiser, and unapologetically myself. It wasn't an easy journey. There were moments when I felt broken, moments when I doubted myself. But in the end, I realized that their betrayal didn't define me. My response to it did. When I returned to Chicago, I felt ready to close this chapter of my life for good. I decided to hold a celebration at the boutique, a small gathering of friends, clients, and colleagues who had supported me through everything. As I stood there that evening, looking around at the people who genuinely cared for me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Ethan or his parents. I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I had gained: freedom, strength, and the knowledge that I could overcome anything. Before the night ended, one of my oldest clients approached me. "Anna," she said with a smile, "you've been through so much, but look at you now. You're an inspiration." I smiled back, feeling the truth in her words. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger than ever. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like myself again. Not Anna, the wife or the victim, but Anna Taylor, the woman who built a life and business on her own terms. This was my story, and I was finally free to write the next chapter. My manipulative mother-in-law blamed me for being unfaithful, accused me of prioritizing my career over my marriage, and claimed I was trying to alienate my husband. When I denied her accusations, she slapped me hard and shouted, "How dare you talk back to me?" Determined to seek revenge, I exposed her secrets during a family gathering, and within the next hour, a shocking surprise awaited everyone. When I first married Daniel, I thought I was stepping into the perfect life. We lived in Austin, Texas, a vibrant, sunny city filled with opportunity. I worked as an architect, designing spaces that people could call home, and Daniel was a financial analyst with a knack for making numbers work in his favor. Our love felt unshakable, built on a foundation of trust and understanding, or so I thought. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? Sometimes the cracks appear in places you never thought to look. For me, those cracks started small, almost unnoticeable, like hairline fractures. At first, it was just little things Daniel would say, offhand remarks that made me feel scrutinized. "Mia, why were you late getting home yesterday?" he'd ask, his tone casual but his eyes searching. "Traffic was bad," I'd reply, brushing it off. But then he'd follow up. "Really? Because Evelyn said she saw you at the coffee shop on Main Street." I didn't think much of it at first. Evelyn, his mother, was always around, always noticing things. She was retired, and I figured she was just keeping herself busy. But then the comments started coming more frequently. "Evelyn said she heard you talking to some man at the grocery store," Daniel would say. Or, "Mom mentioned you were dressed up when you went out to lunch. Why didn't you tell me you were meeting someone?" It felt like every move I made was being monitored, questioned, and dissected. I couldn't figure out why. Daniel had never been this way before. He was the kind of man who trusted me, who celebrated my independence and drive. I tried to dismiss the growing unease, convincing myself it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew something was off. The tipping point came one evening when Daniel came home late from work. His face was tight with tension, and he barely met my eyes as he set his briefcase down. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. I froze. "What's wrong?" He hesitated, and then the words spilled out. "Mom thinks, she thinks you might be hiding something from me. She's noticed a lot of strange things lately. And honestly, Mia, I've started noticing them too." The air was knocked out of me. Hiding something? What was he talking about? "Daniel, that's ridiculous. What could I possibly be hiding?" I demanded. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Mia. But things aren't adding up. You're always so busy, always out. And Mom said she's seen things that don't make sense." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Evelyn, the woman who had always been polite but distant, was planting seeds of doubt in my husband's mind. And worse, he was listening to her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how we had gotten to this point. When had Evelyn decided I wasn't good enough for her son? Was it the fact that I had a demanding career? That I wasn't the type to dote on Daniel the way she did? I decided I had to confront her. The next morning, I drove to her house. Evelyn greeted me at the door with her usual smile, but I could see something calculating in her eyes. "Evelyn, we need to talk," I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She raised an eyebrow. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" I didn't mince words. "I know you've been talking to Daniel about me. Spreading lies. Why are you doing this?" She feigned surprise, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Lies? Mia, I don't know what you're talking about. I only tell Daniel what I see. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about." Her words sent a chill through me. She wasn't denying it. She was twisting the knife, letting me know that she held the power to shape Daniel's perception of me. I left her house that day feeling more determined than ever to protect my marriage. But I also knew I was dealing with someone who wasn't going to back down easily. In the weeks that followed, things got worse. Daniel's doubts grew, fueled by Evelyn's whispers. I started noticing Rachel, an old friend of his, popping up more frequently. Evelyn would casually mention her in conversation. Rachel stopped by to see Daniel the other day. She'd say, "It's so nice that they've stayed close all these years. Don't you think, Mia?" It was infuriating. I could see what she was doing, but Daniel couldn't, or wouldn't. He dismissed my concerns, chalking them up to jealousy. I felt trapped, powerless, like I was losing my husband to a force I couldn't control. But I wasn't going to give up without a fight. If Evelyn wanted to play dirty, I would play smart. I started paying attention, piecing together the puzzle of her manipulation. I had no idea just how deep her betrayal went, but I was determined to find out. As time went on, I realized I couldn't rely on Daniel to see the truth. His loyalty to his mother was unshakable, and Evelyn knew exactly how to exploit it. I had to take matters into my own hands. If I wanted to save my marriage and my sanity, I needed proof of what Evelyn was doing. The first thing I did was start paying closer attention to her patterns. Evelyn was smart, I'll give her that. She never said anything outright that could be pinned down as malicious. Her words were always wrapped in layers of plausible deniability. "I'm just looking out for you," she'd tell Daniel, or "I only want the best for our family." But I knew better. Behind her sugary tone was a carefully crafted web of lies, and I was determined to untangle it. I started keeping a journal, documenting every interaction I had with her, every suspicious comment she made, and every time Daniel came to me with something she'd said. At first, it felt like I was grasping at straws, but soon a pattern began to emerge. Evelyn wasn't just making idle observations. She was deliberately feeding Daniel doubts about me, and she was using Rachel to do it. Rachel. Even thinking about her name made my stomach churn. She and Daniel had been friends since college, and while I never felt threatened by her before, that changed once Evelyn got involved. Suddenly, Rachel was everywhere. She was texting Daniel more often, dropping by unannounced, even joining us for dinner on a couple of occasions. And Evelyn? She was thrilled. "You're so lucky to have someone like Rachel in your life," she told Daniel one evening as we sat around the dining table. "She's always been so supportive of you." I couldn't take it anymore. After Rachel left that night, I confronted Daniel. "Why is she here all the time?" I demanded. "Why are you letting her get so close to us?" Daniel frowned, clearly annoyed. "Mia, she's just a friend. Don't turn this into something it's not." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. Evelyn was using Rachel as a pawn, planting her in our lives to drive a wedge between us. I needed evidence to prove it. One day, I decided to follow my instincts. I installed a small recording app on my phone and left it running during a visit to Evelyn's house. It felt sneaky, underhanded, but I didn't care. I was desperate. When I played back the recording later that night, my heart sank. Evelyn's voice was crystal clear. "You know, Daniel deserves someone who truly appreciates him. Someone like Rachel. She's so much more grounded than Mia. Don't you think?" There it was. Proof that she was actively trying to undermine me. But what really broke me was hearing Daniel's response. "I don't know, Mom. Sometimes I wonder if you're right." Those words cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard. My own husband was doubting me, and Evelyn was the one pulling the strings. I wanted to scream, to cry, to confront Daniel right then and there. But I knew I had to play it smart. If I reacted impulsively, Evelyn would just spin it to her advantage. I decided to dig deeper. Over the next few weeks, I collected more recordings, more texts, and even photos of Evelyn meeting with Rachel at a local cafe. It became clear that she wasn't just planting doubts. She was actively encouraging Rachel to pursue Daniel. One afternoon, I overheard a phone call between Evelyn and Rachel while visiting Evelyn's house. I stayed out of sight, my heart pounding as I listened. "Daniel's been so stressed lately," Evelyn said. "You should check in on him. Maybe invite him out for coffee. He needs someone like you to talk to." Rachel's response was just as infuriating. "I've been meaning to. Thanks for letting me know, Evelyn." It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Evelyn was orchestrating everything, and Rachel was going along with it. I knew then that this wasn't just about jealousy or control. Evelyn wanted me out of the picture entirely. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Armed with my evidence, I began formulating a plan. I would confront Evelyn and Daniel in a way that left no room for denial. I wanted the truth to come out in front of everyone: Evelyn, Daniel, Rachel, and the rest of the family. It was the only way to break her hold on him and expose her for who she really was. Still, there were moments of doubt. Was I doing the right thing? What if Daniel chose to side with her? What if he never forgave me for going behind his back? These questions kept me up at night, but every time I thought about Evelyn's lies, I felt my resolve harden. The final straw came a week before Daniel's brother Ethan's birthday party. I found a text message on Daniel's phone from Rachel. It was nothing explicit, but it was clear she was trying to meet up with him alone. "Let's grab coffee soon," it read. "I miss our talks." I confronted Daniel about it, and his response only confirmed my fears. "Why are you going through my phone, Mia?" he snapped. "You're acting paranoid." "Paranoid?" I shot back. "Do you even hear yourself? Your mother is trying to destroy our marriage, and you're letting her do it." He didn't respond, just walked away, leaving me standing there, trembling with anger and frustration. That was the moment I knew there was no turning back. I spent the next few days preparing for the confrontation. I gathered every piece of evidence I had, recordings, texts, photos, and made sure it was organized and undeniable. When Ethan's birthday party rolled around, I was ready. Evelyn wouldn't know what hit her. When the day of Ethan's birthday party finally arrived, I felt a mix of nerves and determination. I had everything I needed to confront Evelyn, Daniel, and even Rachel if it came to that. I wasn't sure how the rest of the family would react, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. The lies, the manipulation, it had to stop. The party was held at Daniel's parent house, a spacious home with a big backyard perfect for family gatherings. The sun was shining, and everyone seemed in high spirits. Evelyn was playing the role of the perfect hostess, smiling and chatting with relatives, while Daniel stuck close to her, looking more relaxed than he'd been in weeks. Rachel was there too, mingling comfortably with the family. Seeing her made my stomach twist, but I kept my composure. I couldn't afford to let my emotions get the better of me. I waited until most of the guests had finished eating and were gathered in the living room for cake and presents. The perfect moment came when someone asked Ethan to make a speech. As he stood up and began thanking everyone for coming, I could feel my heart pounding. This was it, the moment I would take back control of my life. When Ethan finished, I stood up. "Before we continue, I need to say something," I announced, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. All eyes turned to me, and I could see Evelyn's smile falter. "What is it, Mia?" she asked, her tone sugary sweet, but her eyes narrowing slightly. I looked directly at her. "It's about you, Evelyn, and the things you've been saying and doing behind my back." The room fell silent. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and Evelyn's expression hardened. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice sharp now. "Yes, you do," I replied, my voice firm. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the recordings I had saved. "For weeks, you've been spreading lies about me to Daniel, accusing me of things I haven't done. You've been manipulating him, and you've even been encouraging Rachel to get closer to him. I have proof." Evelyn's face turned pale, but she quickly regained her composure. "This is ridiculous," she said with a forced laugh. "You're trying to turn my son against me."
How dare you?
Daniel looked between us, his confusion evident. "Mia, what are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "I'm talking about this," I said, pressing play on the first recording. Evelyn's voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. "You know, Daniel deserves someone who truly appreciates him. Someone like Rachel. She's so much more grounded than Mia." Gasps rippled through the room. Evelyn's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. "That's taken out of context," she stammered. But I wasn't done. I played another recording of Evelyn urging Rachel to meet Daniel for coffee and showed text messages between Rachel and Evelyn conspiring to create opportunities for her to get close to him. Daniel's face turned red as he listened, his hands clenched into fists. "Mom, is this true?" he demanded. Evelyn glared at me, her mask of politeness completely gone. "I did it for you, Daniel," she snapped. "I was trying to protect you from her. She's not the right woman for you. She never has been. Her words hung in the air like a slap, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then Rachel, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, she said, her voice trembling. But Evelyn, she encouraged me. She told me I was helping you, Daniel. Daniel stared at Rachel in disbelief, then turned to his mother. You've been lying to me, he said, his voice shaking with anger. You've been manipulating me, trying to ruin my marriage. How could you? Evelyn's response was explosive. Because I know what's best for you, she shouted. She's tearing you away from your family, Daniel. I couldn't just stand by and let it happen. In that moment, I stood my ground. Evelyn, the only person tearing this family apart is you. You couldn't control Daniel's life anymore, so you decided to destroy mine instead. Well, it's over now. Everyone knows the truth. Evelyn's anger boiled over, and before I could react, she slapped me across the face. The sound echoed in the stunned silence, and I staggered back, my cheek burning. Gasps filled the room, and Ethan rushed to my side. Are you okay, Mia? He asked, glaring at Evelyn. Daniel stepped between us, his voice like ice. Mom, that's enough. You've gone too far. Evelyn's face crumpled, but there was no sympathy left for her in the room. Family members murmured in shock, and some even stepped away from her, their expressions a mix of disbelief and disappointment. Rachel, looking horrified, quickly excused herself and left the house. Evelyn, on the other hand, refused to apologize. Instead, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. For a moment, the room was silent, and then Daniel turned to me, his eyes filled with remorse. Mia, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. I held back my tears, my voice steady as I said, it's going to take time to fix this, Daniel. But I needed you to see the truth. After the confrontation, the house was left in stunned silence. I could see the weight of everything sinking into Daniel's face, the betrayal, the lies, the manipulation from the one person he had trusted unconditionally. His mother. Evelyn's exit, dramatic as it was, left no doubt in anyone's mind about her guilt. The slap she delivered to me was the final act that revealed her true character to the entire family. I turned to Ethan, who was still standing close, his hand lightly resting on my shoulder. I'm fine, I assured him, though my cheek still burned. The physical pain was minor compared to the emotional whirlwind I was experiencing. The rest of the family began to murmur amongst themselves, their disbelief evident. I overheard snippets of conversations. I can't believe Evelyn would do that. Poor Mia, and even, she's always been a little controlling. But this is too much. Daniel stood frozen, his hands on his hips and his head bowed. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were filled with regret. Mia, he said, his voice soft and broken, I'm sorry. I let her manipulate me, and I didn't trust you. I don't even know how to fix this. I didn't want to humiliate him further in front of the family, but I also wasn't ready to let him off the hook. You didn't believe me, Daniel, I said firmly but quietly. You let her poison our relationship. It's going to take more than an apology to fix this. He nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. I just want us to be okay again. Hearing those words was a small comfort. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but at least he recognized the damage that had been done. In the days that followed, the fallout was monumental. Evelyn, humiliated and shunned by much of the family, left Austin to stay with her sister in another state. She made no effort to apologize, doubling down on her belief that she had only been protecting Daniel. It was clear she wasn't ready to admit her wrongdoing, and frankly, I didn't care anymore. Her absence was a relief. Rachel, too, disappeared from our lives. She sent a brief text to Daniel, apologizing for her role in the drama and admitting that she had allowed Evelyn to manipulate her. I didn't realize how much damage I was causing, she wrote. That was the last we heard from her. Daniel and I started counseling soon after. It wasn't easy. The sessions were raw and uncomfortable, forcing us to confront the trust issues that had taken root in our marriage. Daniel admitted how deeply Evelyn's words had influenced him and I shared how isolated and betrayed I had felt. Slowly, we began to rebuild the foundation of our relationship. Through it all, I found a new sense of strength. Standing up to Evelyn had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but it showed me that I was capable of fighting for myself and for what I believed in. I refused to let her, or anyone else, define my worth. The family dynamic shifted as well. Ethan and a few other relatives reached out to me, offering their support and expressing their disgust with Evelyn's behavior. It was heartening to see that I wasn't alone, that others saw the truth and were willing to stand with me. Now, months later, things are finally beginning to feel normal again. Daniel and I still have work to do, but we're stronger than we've ever been. He's learned to set boundaries with his mother, and I've learned to trust my instincts. Looking back, I realized that Evelyn's betrayal, painful as it was, taught me a valuable lesson about resilience and the power of truth. She tried to tear us apart, but in the end, her lies only made us stronger. The scars are still there, but so is the love, and that's what matters most. On what seemed like an innocent weekend trip, my husband and his scheming mother lured me to a remote mountain bridge and pushed me off, leaving me for dead. As they laughed and claimed, the $100 million is finally ours, they never expected me to survive. But I did. And by the time they returned home to celebrate, they walked straight into a trap. The police were waiting. Justice came faster than they could ever imagine. I never thought my life would take such a dark and twisted turn. My name is Sophia Carter, and I'm 28 years old. I grew up in Seattle, Washington, a city I've always loved for its blend of urban life and natural beauty. I'm an interior designer by profession, passionate about turning spaces into works of art. My life wasn't perfect, but I was happy and independent, at least until Ethan Carter walked into my life. Ethan was charming, the kind of man who could light up a room just by walking in. He was a successful real estate agent, confident and ambitious, and when we met at a friend's housewarming party, it felt like destiny. He was attentive, understanding, and made me laugh like no one else. Within a year, we were married. At first, things were wonderful. Ethan seemed supportive of my career and encouraged me to dream big. I come from a well-off family, but I've always been fiercely independent. I worked hard for what I had, including my beautiful mansion overlooking Lake Washington. It was my sanctuary, a reflection of everything I had achieved on my own. I thought Ethan appreciated that about me, but I was wrong. The cracks in our relationship started showing soon after our wedding. Ethan's mother, Diane, moved to Seattle to be closer to us. I welcomed her at first, thinking it was important to have a good relationship with my in-laws. But Diane was difficult. She had a way of making me feel small with her sharp comments and condescending looks. "You're lucky to have Ethan," she would say, her tone dripping with judgment. "He's such a catch, and you get to enjoy the life he's building for you." It didn't matter how much I explained that I paid for my own lifestyle, she never believed me. In her eyes, I was a gold digger who didn't deserve her son. Ethan, of course, always sided with her. "That's just how Mom is," he would say when I complained. "She doesn't mean any harm." But it wasn't just Diane's words. She started interfering in our lives, showing up unannounced and rummaging through my belongings. Once, she borrowed a designer vase from my collection to use for her book club, only to return it chipped. She didn't apologize. Instead, she said, "You can afford another one, can't you?" The tension in our home grew worse. Ethan, who had once been my biggest supporter, started criticizing me too. It was subtle at first, small comments about my choices or my work hours. Then it escalated. He would complain about how much time I spent at my job and imply that I wasn't as committed to our marriage as I should be. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. The love I thought Ethan and I had was replaced with something unrecognizable. But I held on, hoping things would get better. I tried to convince myself that it was just a rough patch. After all, every marriage has its challenges, right? Then one day, Ethan suggested we go on a trip to the Cascade Mountains. He said it would be good for us to reconnect, to spend some time away from the stress of our daily lives. Diane would come too, he added, because she could use a little getaway. I hesitated. A trip with Diane didn't sound relaxing, but Ethan was insistent. He said we'd visit a scenic spot with breathtaking views, a place perfect for stargazing, something he knew I loved. His enthusiasm felt genuine, and I wanted to believe that he still cared. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The day of the trip started off strangely. Diane was unusually warm, complimenting my outfit and chatting about how much she'd been looking forward to spending time together. It felt off. Diane had never been this friendly, but I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe she was trying to make amends. We drove for hours, the city fading into rolling hills and dense forests. Ethan was in high spirits, pointing out landmarks and cracking jokes. Diane, too, seemed unusually cheerful. I started to relax, thinking maybe this trip would help us all turn a new page. When we reached the scenic spot, it was breathtaking. The bridge spanned a deep gorge, with a rushing river below. The view of the surrounding mountains under the setting sun was spectacular. For a moment, I forgot about all the tension and let myself enjoy the beauty around me. "Why don't you take a picture?" Diane suggested, her voice oddly sweet. "This view is too good to miss." I nodded and walked toward the edge of the bridge, my camera in hand. I was so focused on capturing the moment that I didn't notice Ethan and Diane exchanging glances behind me. Then it happened. Suddenly, I felt a hard shove from behind. Time seemed to slow as I lost my balance and tumbled over the edge. I barely registered Diane's voice behind me, calm and cold. "Goodbye, Sophia," she said. The last thing I saw before hitting the ledge below was the smug satisfaction on her face. When I opened my eyes, I couldn't believe I was still alive. My body ached, and I could feel blood trickling down the side of my face, but I was breathing. I'd landed on a narrow ledge just below the bridge, one that probably saved my life. My head spun as I tried to piece together what had just happened. Ethan and Diane had pushed me. They had wanted me to die. The realization was like ice water coursing through my veins. My own husband and his mother, people I trusted, had tried to kill me.
And for what?
My home, my money, anger and betrayal burned inside me, but there was no time to dwell on it. I was still in danger. I looked down. The river roared far below, the rocks gleaming in the fading sunlight. The drop was too far to survive. Above me, the bridge loomed, but it was out of reach. I had to find a way to climb or signal for help. My body screamed in protest as I inched along the ledge, looking for something, anything, that could save me. As the night closed in, I spotted a faint light moving through the trees below. My heart leapt. A hiker. Summoning all my strength, I screamed for help. The figure froze, then began moving toward me. Relief flooded through me as I saw a man appear beneath the ledge, shining his flashlight upward. "Are you hurt?" he called out, his voice laced with concern. "I need help," I shouted back. "I can't move."
Hold on.
"I'm calling for help," he replied. Minutes felt like hours as I clung to the ledge, waiting for rescue. Eventually, I heard the sound of voices and saw a rescue team arrive with ropes and harnesses. They pulled me to safety, and I collapsed onto the ground, trembling but alive. One of the paramedics looked at me with worry. "You're lucky to be alive." "What happened?" I hesitated. My mind was racing, trying to decide what to say. Ethan and Diane had left me for dead, and I had no proof, yet. I couldn't let them know I had survived. Not until I had a plan. So I lied. "I slipped," I said, my voice shaking. The view was so beautiful. I got too close to the edge. The paramedics nodded, but the hiker didn't look convinced. "It's a miracle you're okay," he said. "That's a dangerous spot." They transported me to a small clinic in a nearby town, where I was treated for cuts and bruises. My injuries weren't severe, but the emotional wounds were devastating. Lying on the hospital bed, I replayed everything in my mind: Ethan's insistence on the trip, Diane's sudden kindness, and the moment I felt their hands shove me over the edge. I knew I couldn't face this alone. There was only one person I trusted completely: my father, James. The next morning I called my dad. Hearing his voice was like a lifeline. "Dad, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sophia? Are you okay? You sound off, he said, his tone immediately filled with concern. I need your help. Can you come to me? I'll explain everything when you're here, I said. Of course, he said without hesitation. Where are you? I gave him my location, and within hours, my dad arrived in his private jet. He looked at me with a mix of relief and alarm when he saw my bandaged face. What happened, Sophia? He asked, gripping my hand. It's Ethan and Diane, I whispered, my voice trembling. They tried to kill me. His expression darkened. Tell me everything. I recounted every detail, the trip, the push, and my desperate climb to safety. My dad listened quietly, his jaw tightening with every word. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, We're going to make them pay. But we need to be smart about this. Over the next few days, my dad and I worked tirelessly to gather evidence. He hired private investigators to dig into Ethan and Diane's financial records. What they found was staggering. Ethan and Diane had been planning this for months. They had forged documents, tried to access my accounts, and even drafted plans to sell my mansion. As we uncovered their schemes, I remembered something that could be critical: my phone. I had left it in the car during the trip, but it automatically recorded audio when certain settings were triggered. I asked my dad to retrieve it, and when we played back the recording, my stomach churned. Diane's voice was unmistakable. After tonight, she'll be gone, she said. We'll have the house and everything else. Just act normal. Ethan replied, She won't see it coming. Let's make sure this looks like an accident. I stared at the phone, my hands trembling. This is it, I said. This is the proof we need. My dad nodded. We're taking this to the police. They won't get away with this. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted them to feel the fear they had tried to inflict on me. So, I made a decision. I would return home and pretend nothing had happened. I wanted to see the look on their faces when they realized their plan had failed. Are you sure about this? My dad asked, worried. I'm sure, I said, my voice firm. They need to know I'm not someone they can break. I returned to Seattle with my father's support, but I kept my injuries concealed as best I could. The scratches and bruises could be explained away, but the real battle was in my mind. I was terrified yet determined. Ethan and Diane had tried to erase me from their lives, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I walked into our home as if nothing had happened. When I opened the front door, Ethan was in the kitchen, his back turned to me. He jumped when he saw me, his face pale. Sophia, you're back, he stammered. His shock was poorly disguised under a fake smile. We didn't expect you until tomorrow. I decided to come back early, I said, keeping my voice calm. The mountains were more than I bargained for. Before he could respond, Diane walked in. Her reaction was less restrained. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw panic flicker across her face. Then, she quickly masked it with her usual condescension. Oh, you're home. How was the trip? She asked, her voice unnaturally cheerful. It was unforgettable, I replied, locking eyes with her. Absolutely unforgettable. I watched as they exchanged nervous glances, but I said nothing more. Let them squirm, I thought. I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I needed them to feel safe, to think their secret was still buried. Over the next few days, I played the part of the unsuspecting wife. I acted as though nothing had changed, smiling through dinners and nodding along to Diane's passive-aggressive comments. Inside, I was boiling with rage, but I knew patience was key. My father and the investigators were working behind the scenes, uncovering more about Ethan and Diane's financial schemes. One evening, while Ethan was in his office, I casually brought up the trip. You know, I said, swirling a glass of wine, I almost had an accident on that bridge. Lost my footing for a moment. Ethan froze, his hand tightening around his glass. Really? That's scary, he said, his voice strained. Yes, it was, I said, watching his reaction carefully. Good thing I managed to catch myself. Diane, who was sitting across from me, looked visibly uncomfortable. Well, thank goodness you're okay, she said, trying to dismiss the topic. Accidents can happen, you know. Oh, I know, I said, smiling. Sometimes, people fall when they least expect it. The color drained from her face, and I took a long sip of my wine, savoring the moment. Meanwhile, my father and I prepared our case. The recordings from my phone were damning, but we needed more. The investigators uncovered forged signatures on property documents, evidence of Diane transferring money from Ethan's account to her own, and even emails detailing their plans to sell my mansion once I was gone. It was more than enough to take to the police. When everything was ready, I invited Ethan and Diane to dinner. I wanted them to feel the weight of their choices before the world came crashing down on them. They arrived at the dining table, oblivious to what was about to happen. Ethan poured wine, and Diane commented on the decor, as if they hadn't tried to kill me days earlier. I could barely stomach their presence, but I kept my composure. "I wanted to thank you both for everything," I said as we sat down. "For supporting me, for being there for me, even on that trip." Ethan glanced at Diane, his expression uneasy. "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. "We're family." "Yes," I said, leaning forward, my voice sharp. "And family should never betray each other. Don't you think?" The room went silent. Diane fidgeted in her seat, her eyes darting around the room. Ethan tried to laugh it off. "What's this about, Sophia?" "Oh, nothing," I said, standing up. "I just thought you'd like to know that I remember everything. The bridge. The shove. The things you said before you left me for dead." Their faces turned ghostly pale. Diane stammered, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Save it," I snapped, slamming my hands on the table. "I know what you did, and I have proof." Ethan jumped to his feet, trying to deny it. "Sophia, you're being ridiculous." "Am I?" I said, pulling out my phone. I played the recording of Diane's voice, her cold words echoing through the room. "After tonight, she'll be gone. We'll have the house and everything else." The blood drained from Diane's face, and Ethan's jaw dropped. You recorded us?" he said, his voice trembling. "Yes," I said, glaring at them. "And that's not all. The police know everything, your forged documents, your plans to steal from me. It's over." Ethan lunged toward me, but before he could get close, the front door burst open. 2 police officers stepped in, followed by my father. Diane screamed, and Ethan froze, his hands raised in surrender. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy," one of the officers said, handcuffing Ethan. Diane tried to protest, but it was useless. They were both led out of the house in disgrace. That night, I stood in the quiet of my living room, staring out at Lake Washington. The storm was over, but I wasn't the same person anymore. My trust had been shattered, but I had survived. More importantly, I had fought back. The days after Ethan and Diane's arrest were surreal. The house that once felt like a prison was now quiet, almost peaceful. Yet the calm couldn't erase the weight of what I'd endured. I had trusted Ethan with my heart, only for him to betray me completely. Diane, who I'd hoped to bond with, had treated me as an enemy from the start. The betrayal ran deep, but so did my resolve to rebuild my life. Ethan and Diane's downfall became the talk of Seattle. The media dubbed it the greedy betrayal, and their faces dominated the news. Reports detailed their forged documents, stolen funds, and murderous plot against me. The evidence, audio recordings, and financial records, was undeniable. Ethan's real estate clients abandoned him, and Diane's social circle vanished overnight. Their reputations were ruined. The trial was grueling, but I refused to back down. I took the stand, recounting the mountain trip, the shove off the bridge, and my fight for survival. Every word reopened old wounds, but it was necessary. The court and the world needed to hear the truth. Ethan sat silently, his confidence replaced by a hollow shell. Diane tried to play the victim, insisting I'd misunderstood their actions, but the evidence spoke louder than her lies. The jury quickly found them guilty of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Ethan was sentenced to 25 years, Diane to 20. Justice was served. After the trial, I couldn't stay in the mansion. It held too many painful memories. I sold it and moved to San Francisco to be near my father. His presence was a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. He'd been my anchor through everything, and now it was time to start over. One evening, as we sat on his patio overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, he said, "Sophia, you're stronger than I ever imagined. You've survived what most wouldn't." "I had to," I replied. "But I don't want survival to be my whole story. I want to create something meaningful from this." That conversation sparked the idea for Haven Home, a refuge for women trapped in toxic relationships or betrayed by those they trusted. It would be a sanctuary where they could find safety, healing, and support to rebuild their lives. Launching Haven Home wasn't easy, but with my father's resources and my determination, we made it happen. The first location was small but welcoming, offering counseling, legal aid, and workshops to help women regain independence. I became a certified counselor, using my experiences to guide others through their pain. The work was challenging but rewarding. Each woman who walked through our doors, broken yet hopeful, was a reflection of myself. Every success story, a woman regaining her strength, was a piece of my soul reclaimed. One day, Amanda arrived at Haven Home, her black eye and trembling voice breaking my heart. "I don't know where else to go," she said. "My husband controls everything. I'm suffocating." "You're safe here," I assured her. "We'll help you." Helping Amanda regain her footing reminded me why I'd started this journey. She left weeks later, smiling, ready to embrace her new life. As for Ethan and Diane, their lives spiraled downward in prison. Ethan, ostracized by inmates for his crimes, lost everything. Diane's attempts to manipulate others failed, leaving her isolated. They wrote me letters begging for forgiveness, but I never replied. Forgiveness was a gift they hadn't earned. Over time, I began to heal. The scars of betrayal remained, but no longer defined me. Haven Home grew into a national network of shelters, each a beacon of hope. Looking back, I marvel at how I survived the fall, both literal and figurative. Perhaps it was luck or a reminder that even in the darkest moments, we can find inner strength. Sitting in my new home, the sun setting over the San Francisco Bay, I felt peace. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor, a fighter, and an advocate. Ethan and Diane's story became a cautionary tale, but mine became one of resilience and hope. Justice had prevailed, and I had reclaimed my life. No matter how dark the night, the dawn always comes. My ruthless stepmother laced my meal with poison, leaving me crumpled on the floor. She tied me up and abandoned me in a desolate, dark forest, laughing as she claimed, "Her inheritance is mine now." My deceitful father stood by her side. But when they smugly returned home, expecting victory, their blood ran cold, because I was there, waiting with a plan they'd never see coming. My name is Evelyn Grant. I'm 26 years old, and if you'd asked me a few years ago what my life would look like, I would have told you something very different from what I'm about to share. My mother, Margaret, was the most inspiring woman I've ever known. She built a thriving fashion boutique in our small town of Colton, Texas, starting from nothing but raw talent and determination. She taught me everything I know about resilience and the power of hard work. After her sudden passing 2 years ago, I inherited the boutique and our family home. For a while, I thought I could manage everything, that I could live up to her legacy. But life had other plans for me. What I didn't realize then was that her death marked not just the loss of a parent, but the beginning of a nightmare I never saw coming. It all started when my father, Robert, remarried just 6 months after Mom passed. His new wife, Diane, seemed charming at first, a polished, soft-spoken woman who moved into our home with her teenage son, Ethan. Diane's past was a mystery, but she wasted no time making herself comfortable in my mother's house. I wanted to believe her intentions were genuine, that she was here to support my father and help him through his grief. But little things began to bother me. Diane started making changes around the house, rearranging furniture, removing my mother's favorite decor, and even suggesting that we remodel the boutique to modernize it. I was polite but firm. This was my mother's legacy, and I wouldn't let anyone erase her from our lives. Diane didn't take kindly to that. She began planting ideas in my father's head, questioning whether I was capable of running the business. Evelyn is young, she'd say. Maybe she needs some guidance. My father, who had always been supportive, suddenly seemed to doubt me. He began involving himself in decisions he'd never cared about before, siding with Diane in ways that made me feel like an outsider in my own family. At first, I chalked it up to adjustment. Blended families are never easy, right? But Diane's motives soon became crystal clear. She wasn't here to help. She was here to take over. The first real sign came when she suggested that Ethan work at the boutique part-time. It'll give him a sense of responsibility, she said with a sweet smile. I reluctantly agreed, but Ethan showed no interest in helping. Instead, he spent most of his time snooping around, asking questions about sales and inventory, things a 13-year-old had no business knowing. Then, Diane began insisting on attending business meetings with me. She'd sit there, quietly taking notes, but her presence was intimidating. She started undermining my decisions, questioning my strategies in front of clients and vendors. I just think we should explore other options, she'd say, as if she were co-owner. I tried talking to my father about it, but he brushed me off. Diane's just trying to help, he said. You're lucky to have her. That's when I realized he was no longer my father. Diane controlled him like a puppet, and he let her. Things escalated quickly. Diane started intercepting my mail, signing contracts without my approval, and even changed the locks on the boutique under the pretense of security upgrades. I felt my grip on everything slipping. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Diane served me a plate of pasta. It smelled odd, but I didn't think much of it. I was too exhausted to argue. That night, I woke up with a splitting headache and a sick feeling in my stomach. I tried to get out of bed, but my limbs felt heavy, my vision blurred. Before I could make sense of what was happening, I blacked out. When I came to, I was somewhere cold and damp. My hands and feet were tied, and the metallic taste of fear filled my mouth. I tried to scream, but my throat was raw and dry. The realization hit me like a freight train. Diane and my father had done this to me. Their voices echoed in the distance, laughing as if they'd won. We've finally done it, Diane said. The business, the house, everything is ours now. I never thought it would be this easy, my father added, his voice devoid of any warmth. They left me there, tied up in the middle of a dark forest, believing I wouldn't survive. But they underestimated me. I wasn't ready to die. Not yet. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I started pulling at the ropes. The bark of the tree they'd tied me to scraped against my hands, but I didn't care. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, but finally, the rope loosened enough for me to slip free. My wrists were raw, my legs shaky, but I was alive. The forest was silent except for the rustle of leaves underfoot as I stumbled forward, hoping for a miracle. Just as I was about to collapse, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small farmhouse, and it felt like salvation. This was just the beginning. They thought they could destroy me. They thought wrong. As I stumbled toward the farmhouse, each step felt like a battle. The cold night air stung my skin, and my legs threatened to give out with every move. But that faint light, warm and steady, drew me forward. It was my lifeline, a promise that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I felt. I reached the door and knocked weakly, my fist barely making a sound. For a moment, I thought no one would answer. But then the door creaked open, revealing an older man with kind eyes and a weathered face. He stared at me, his brows knitting together in concern. "Miss, are you all right?" he asked, his voice gruff but gentle. I need help," I managed to croak before my legs finally gave out. The next thing I knew, I was lying on a worn but clean couch, a thick quilt draped over me. The man, his name was Joe Carter, as I later learned, brought me a glass of water and sat beside me, his weathered hands resting on his knees. "Take it slow," he said as I struggled to sit up. "You've been through something, haven't you?" The kindness in his voice was my undoing. The floodgates opened, and I told him everything about my stepmother, Diane, my father, and how they'd left me for dead in the forest. Joe listened intently, his expression darkening with every word. "People like that," he said when I finished, "they think they can take whatever they want. But you're here, and that means they didn't win." His words were a balm to my battered soul. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. Joe didn't pry or push me to do anything I wasn't ready for. He simply handed me a plate of food, warm bread and soup, and let me eat in peace. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the small kitchen window, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let Diane and my father get away with what they'd done. But I also knew I couldn't fight them alone. That's when I thought of Jake. Jake Miller was more than just a childhood friend. He was the one person I trusted completely. We'd grown up together, chasing fireflies and sharing secrets, and though we'd gone our separate ways after high school, we'd kept in touch. Jake had always dreamed of becoming a police officer, and now he was one of the best in the force. Joe offered me his old landline to call him. My hands shook as I dialed the number, but when Jake's familiar voice answered, a sense of calm washed over me. "Evelyn? Is that you?" he asked, his tone a mix of surprise and worry. "What's going on?" "Jake," I said, my voice trembling. "I need your help." I told him everything, and by the time I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Evelyn," he finally said, his voice firm, "you're safe now, right?" "Yes," I replied, glancing at Joe, who gave me an encouraging nod.
Good. Stay where you are.
"I'm coming to get you." Jake arrived at the farmhouse later that afternoon. When he saw me, his face hardened, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a fierce determination. "They did this to you?" he asked, his jaw clenched. I nodded, tears threatening to spill over.
They tried to kill me, Jake.
"They wanted everything, my business, the house, all of it." "They're not going to get away with this," he said, his voice like steel. Jake wasted no time getting to work. He asked me for every detail I could remember, the poisoned food, the ropes, the forest. He even inspected the bruises on my wrists, taking pictures for evidence. Joe, ever the quiet guardian, handed Jake a cup of coffee and offered to help in any way he could. "People like that," Joe said, echoing his earlier words, "they think they're untouchable. But no one's above the law." Jake nodded. "And I'm going to prove it." Over the next few days, Jake began piecing together the evidence we needed. He reached out to a forensic expert to analyze the remains of the meal Diane had poisoned me with, a crucial piece of the puzzle. He also accessed financial records showing that Diane had been siphoning money from the boutique into her own accounts. But the biggest breakthrough came when Jake obtained a recording of Diane and my father talking. One of the boutique employees, who had grown suspicious of Diane's behavior, had secretly recorded their conversation. In it, Diane bragged about her plan to take over everything, laughing about how easy it had been to manipulate my father. "She's as good as caught," Jake said when he played the recording for me. "This is the nail in her coffin." Listening to Diane's voice, so smug, so cruel, I felt a surge of anger. But beneath that anger was something stronger, resolve. I wasn't just going to sit back and watch her destroy everything my mother had worked for. I was going to fight back. That night, as I lay on the couch in Joe's farmhouse, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Diane and my father had underestimated me. They thought I was weak, but they were about to learn just how wrong they were. "I'm coming for what's mine," I whispered to myself, the determination in my voice surprising even me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. And I was ready for the fight of my life. The days that followed were a blur of preparation and determination. Jake worked tirelessly, piecing together the evidence we needed to ensure Diane and my father would face justice. I stayed at Joe's farmhouse during this time, grateful for the quiet and safety it provided. But I couldn't stay in the shadows forever. This was my fight, and I intended to see it through. Jake kept me updated on every development. He managed to subpoena financial records that showed Diane had been forging documents to transfer ownership of the boutique to herself. My father's name was all over those papers, too. His signature was the final stamp on their deceit. "It's not just fraud, Evelyn," Jake said one evening as we sat in his office, going over the evidence. "It's premeditated theft." And with the poisoning, we've got a strong case for attempted murder. Hearing the words spoken out loud sent a chill through me. My own father had signed off on this. My father, who used to read me bedtime stories and cheer me on at school plays, had chosen Diane's greed over his own daughter. Do you think they'll actually be punished? I asked, my voice trembling. Jake looked at me, his expression serious. With what we've got, they don't stand a chance. But you have to be ready, Evelyn. It's going to be messy. Messy was an understatement. The day Jake informed Diane and my father that they were under investigation, all hell broke loose. Diane stormed into the boutique, her face twisted with rage. She shouted at the staff, accusing them of betrayal, and even tried to fire one of the managers who had been helping us gather evidence. Jake was there within minutes, his badge flashing as he escorted her out. "You're done here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Leave now, or I'll arrest you on the spot." My father wasn't much better. He called me that evening, his voice a mixture of desperation and anger. "Evelyn, what are you doing?" he demanded. "We're family. You don't betray family like this." The irony of his words was almost laughable. "You left me to die, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me.
You and Diane.
"Don't talk to me about betrayal." There was silence on the other end, and then he hung up. That was the last time I heard his voice. The investigation continued to build momentum. Jake managed to obtain surveillance footage from a nearby gas station that showed my father and Diane loading my unconscious body into their car the night they left me in the forest. The footage was damning, a visual confirmation of their crime. As more evidence piled up, I began to feel a sense of vindication.
But it wasn't just about me.
This was about my mother's legacy, the boutique she'd poured her heart and soul into. I couldn't let them tarnish what she had built. The turning point came when Jake called me late one evening. "We've got them," he said, his voice triumphant. "The DA is pressing charges, fraud, attempted murder, conspiracy. They're going down, Evelyn." Hearing those words should have brought me relief, but instead, I felt a wave of exhaustion. The fight wasn't over yet. The trial would be the final battleground, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. The court date arrived sooner than I expected. Walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Diane and my father sat at the defense table, their expressions ranging from defiance to guilt. Diane's polished facade had cracked, revealing the cold, calculating person beneath. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. Jake sat beside me, his presence a steadying force. "Remember," he whispered, "you've got the truth on your side." The prosecution laid out the case with precision. The financial records, the surveillance footage, the recording of Diane boasting about her plans, it was all there, an unshakable wall of evidence. When they played the footage of Diane and my father loading me into the car, I saw jurors exchange looks of shock and disgust. The defense tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that they had only been acting in self-defense against my erratic behavior. But the evidence was too overwhelming. By the time the trial ended, it was clear the jury saw through their lies. I'll never forget the moment the verdict was read, guilty on all counts. Diane and my father were sentenced to long-term imprisonment. The judge's words were final, a punctuation mark on their reign of deceit. As they were led away in handcuffs, Diane turned to glare at me one last time. "You'll regret this," she hissed. But I didn't. Not for 1 second. After the trial, there was a quiet sense of closure. Diane and my father were gone, and the boutique was finally mine again. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. My mother's legacy was safe, and so was I. But the fight had changed me. I wasn't the same person who had been tied up and left for dead in the forest. I was stronger now, more determined. And I knew this was just the beginning of rebuilding my life. The day after the trial, I stood in the middle of the boutique, taking it all in. For the first time in years, the space felt like it was mine again. The heavy weight of Diane's presence was gone. The boutique was no longer a battlefield of manipulation and deceit. It was a place of hope, just as my mother had intended it to be. But the journey back wasn't easy. The damage Diane and my father had done wasn't just financial, it was emotional. They had eroded trust, both mine and that of the people who worked here. Many of the employees had witnessed Diane's power plays and feared for their jobs. I knew it would take time to rebuild not just the boutique, but the relationships within it. The first thing I did was gather the team for a meeting. Standing in the same office where Diane had once tried to take over, I spoke to them openly. "Thank you for sticking with me," I began, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I know the past couple of years haven't been easy, but this boutique isn't just a business. It's a part of my mother's legacy. And with your help, I want to make it something we can all be proud of again." Their response was overwhelming. There were tears, laughter, and most importantly, a sense of unity. I saw hope in their eyes, and it reignited my determination to move forward. One of the first things I did was return the boutique to its original vision. Diane had made changes, trying to mold it into something that reflected her shallow ambitions. I reversed those changes, bringing back the warmth and creativity that had been my mother's signature. The soft pastels, elegant displays, and personal touches were restored. The boutique became not just a business, but a place where people felt welcome, inspired, and valued. Outside of work, I began to heal in other ways too. Jake remained a constant in my life, his unwavering support a reminder that not everyone would betray me. He refused to let me dwell in the darkness of the past, always pushing me to look forward. One afternoon, as we sat at a coffee shop near the boutique, he grinned at me. "So, what's next for Evelyn Grant? World domination?" I laughed, the sound surprising even myself. "Maybe just a little. But first, I think I need to take a breath and figure out who I am after all this." "Who you are," he said, leaning forward, "is one of the strongest people I've ever met."
Don't forget that.
His words stayed with me. For so long, I had been defined by what Diane and my father had done to me. But now I realized I had the power to define myself. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. In the months that followed, the boutique thrived. Words spread about the changes and customers returned, excited to see what we had to offer. I even introduced a new line of clothing inspired by my mother's early designs, calling it Margaret's Collection. It was a tribute to her legacy, and it became a huge success. But the biggest transformation happened within me. I took steps to ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. I consulted with lawyers to secure my ownership of the boutique and the house, making sure every detail was airtight. I also started therapy to process everything I had been through. It wasn't easy, but it helped me let go of the anger and pain that had weighed me down for so long. The house, too, became a sanctuary once more. I repainted the walls, restored the garden, and filled the rooms with memories of my mother. It was no longer a place of conflict, but a home, a safe haven where I could dream and build a future. One evening, as I stood in the garden, the scent of blooming roses filling the air, I thought about my journey. From the moment Diane and my father tried to destroy me, to the forest where they left me for dead, to the courtroom where I took back my life. I had survived it all. And I had come out stronger. Joe Carter, the kind farmer who had saved me, remained a dear friend. I visited him often, bringing fresh pastries from the bakery near the boutique. Every time I saw him, he'd smile and say, "You're a fighter, Evelyn. Don't ever forget it." I didn't. I knew now that resilience wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about taking what life throws at you and turning it into something beautiful. As I write this, sitting in the boutique's office surrounded by my mother's designs and the laughter of my employees, I feel a sense of peace. Diane and my father may have tried to steal everything from me, but they didn't succeed. They only made me stronger, more determined to protect what's mine. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And that's enough. Looking back, I realize now that the betrayal I experienced wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. One where I learned to stand up for myself, to trust the people who truly care for me, and to never let anyone dim the light my mother passed on to me. This is my story, and it's far from over. But for now, I'm at peace. And that, I think, is the greatest revenge of all. My jealous stepsister stole my wealthy husband and kicked me out of the house. After 5 years, She met me at a restaurant and said, "You're still single and working as a waitress?" I laughed. She threw cold water on me, so I called security. She was stunned and dropped to her knees, begging for forgiveness. Then my husband stepped forward. Sophia sat in a quiet corner of her restaurant, her fingers gently tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The dim golden light reflected on the glass walls, giving the place a warm, elegant glow. She took a deep breath and let out a small, almost nostalgic smile before she began speaking. You know, life has a way of teaching us lessons in the most brutal ways. If you had told me years ago that I would be sitting here telling my story, I would have laughed. Back then, I believed in love, in trust, in the promises people made. I was naive, but life showed me the truth. She paused for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts, then continued, her voice steady, but filled with memories. I was married once, to a man I loved with all my heart. His name was Daniel. He was charming, successful, and had a way of making me feel like the most important person in the world. When we got married, I thought I had everything: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a future filled with happiness. I worked hard, too. I wasn't the kind of woman to sit back and rely on my husband's wealth. I had experience in hotel management, and I loved my work. I dedicated myself to helping Daniel with his businesses, making sure everything was running smoothly. But I never realized that while I was busy building our life, someone else was busy destroying it. Sophia's expression darkened slightly as she leaned back, exhaling deeply. My stepsister, Emma. We weren't close growing up, but I never thought she would betray me like she did. She always had this jealousy in her eyes. No matter what I did, she always wanted more.
And Daniel?
He fell right into her trap. I should have noticed the small things, the way she looked at him, the secretive smiles they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. But I trusted them. I trusted my husband. I trusted my own family. She let out a bitter chuckle, shaking her head. Then one day, everything changed. Daniel started acting differently. He became distant, cold. The man who once held my hand and promised me forever now barely looked at me. I asked him what was wrong, but he always had some excuse. Work stress, he said. Business pressure. But I knew something was off. And then, one evening, he just said it: "I want a divorce." Just like that. No explanation, no remorse. Just a simple statement that shattered my world. Sophia's fingers tightened around her cup as her voice dropped lower. I begged him to tell me why. I asked him if I had done something wrong, if I had failed him in some way. And then she walked in.
Emma.
Smiling. Standing beside my husband like she had every right to be there. And when I looked at Daniel, I saw the truth in his eyes. He had already replaced me. My own sister had stolen my husband. She inhaled sharply, pushing back the emotions threatening to surface. I screamed, I cried, but they didn't care. They laughed. They actually laughed at me, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience in their perfect little world. Emma smirked, resting her hand on Daniel's shoulder, as if to prove that she had won. And Daniel? He just told me to pack my things and leave. My own home. The place I had built with him. He threw me out like I was nothing. Her voice wavered for a second, but she quickly steadied herself. That night, I walked out with nothing but the clothes on my back. I had no home, no money, no one to turn to. I was completely alone. I remember standing on the street, feeling the cold wind against my skin, wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I could have given up. I could have let them break me. But I didn't. Something inside me refused to let them win. A faint smile played on her lips, but her eyes held a storm of memories. I had experience in hotel management, and I knew I had to start over. I went from one hotel to another, looking for a job. It wasn't easy. Some places turned me away, others offered positions far below what I was qualified for. But I took what I could get. I worked as a receptionist, then a hotel supervisor. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I refused to be a victim. She took another deep breath, her expression hardening. And then, one day, my hard work paid off. That's when I met Ryan. a powerful businessman, owner of one of the most luxurious hotel chains in New York. He wasn't just another wealthy man, he was smart, kind, and respected my talent. He saw potential in me when no one else did. I started working for him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt valued. I wasn't just someone's abandoned wife. I was Sophia, the woman who refused to break. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes gleaming with quiet strength. But life wasn't done with me yet. Fate had something planned, something that would bring me face to face with my past in the most unexpected way. And when that moment came, I knew I would finally get the justice I deserved. Starting over wasn't easy. The first few months were the hardest. I had no money, no home, and no one to rely on. The pain of betrayal burned inside me every single day, but I refused to let it consume me. I told myself that I had two choices. I could sit in my misery and let Daniel and Emma win, or I could stand up and rebuild my life. I chose the second option. I found a small, cheap apartment. Nothing compared to the luxury I once had, but it was mine. I worked long hours at a small hotel as a receptionist. It was humiliating at first, considering I had once managed a five-star establishment, but I swallowed my pride. I needed money, and I needed stability. Every single day, I pushed myself, taking extra shifts, learning more about the business, and proving that I was more than just a woman who had been thrown away. Then one evening, everything changed. The hotel where I was working was hosting a high-profile business event, and the staff was struggling to keep up. I couldn't stand by and watch everything fall apart, so I stepped in. I took charge, coordinated the service, and made sure the guests were taken care of. That's when I met Ryan. He was standing near the entrance, observing everything with an interested expression. I didn't know who he was at first, but I could tell he was important. Later that night, he approached me. "You handled that situation well," he said. His voice was calm but authoritative, the kind that made people listen. I thanked him, thinking it was just a passing compliment, but then he asked me something unexpected. "Have you ever considered working in a high-end hotel again?" I looked at him, surprised. "I used to. But things changed." He nodded, as if he already knew my story. "I own multiple luxury hotels. I need someone who understands the business, someone who knows how to manage difficult situations. I think you're that person." At first, I thought it was too good to be true. People didn't just walk into your life and offer you a chance like that. But Ryan wasn't just anyone. He saw my potential, and for the first time in a long time, someone believed in me again. I took the job. Working for Ryan was completely different from anything I had experienced before. He was sharp, demanding but fair. He challenged me, pushed me to be better, and slowly, I found my confidence again. My career flourished, and before I knew it, I was managing one of his most prestigious hotels. The woman who had been abandoned and humiliated was now in a position of power again. But that wasn't the only thing that changed. Ryan and I spent a lot of time together, discussing business, strategizing, and making decisions that shaped the future of his hotels. Somewhere along the way, those conversations became more personal. He asked about my past, and for the first time, I told someone everything: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggle. He listened, not with pity, but with understanding. And then one night, he told me something that caught me off guard. "Sophia, you're more than what they did to you. You didn't just survive, you rose above it." And I admire that.
I didn't know what to say.
For so long, I had been carrying the weight of my past, thinking it defined me. But Ryan saw something else, someone who had fought and won. Over time, our relationship shifted. What started as mutual respect turned into something deeper. He wasn't like Daniel. There were no sweet lies, no hidden betrayals. With Ryan, everything was clear and honest. And when he asked me to marry him, I knew my life had finally taken a turn for the better. Becoming Ryan's wife wasn't just about love. It was about reclaiming my power. He didn't just see me as his wife. He saw me as a partner. As a wedding gift, he gave me ownership of 2 luxury restaurants under his hotel chain. It was his way of showing me that he believed in me, that I was capable of running something successful on my own. I had come a long way from the broken woman who had been thrown out onto the streets. Now, I was successful, respected, and loved by a man who truly valued me. But life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. Just when I thought I had left my past behind, fate decided to bring me face to face with the very people who had tried to destroy me. It happened at a grand business event held at one of my restaurants. The place was filled with the wealthiest and most powerful people in the industry. I was walking through the crowd, making sure everything was perfect, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Sophia?" I turned around, and there they were, Daniel and Emma. For a moment, time seemed to stop. It had been years since I had last seen them, but they hadn't changed much. The same arrogance, the same smug expressions. But what they didn't realize was that I wasn't the same woman they had abandoned. Daniel's eyes widened in surprise. You work here?" Emma smirked. "I guess life didn't turn out so well for you after all." They thought I was still struggling. They thought I was nothing. I could have told them the truth right then and there, but I didn't. Instead, I just smiled, letting them believe what they wanted. Their mockery didn't affect me anymore because I knew something they didn't. This was my restaurant. I owned it. And soon, they would find out in the most satisfying way possible. I turned to a waiter and casually said, "Bring some water to these guests. They seem a little too confident for their own good." I knew what was coming next. And I was ready. Because this time, I was the one in control. The moment was almost surreal. After all these years, there they were, Daniel and Emma, standing in front of me, laughing at what they thought was my downfall. If only they knew. I let them have their moment, let them feel superior. I wasn't going to ruin the surprise just yet. Emma crossed her arms, her eyes filled with that same arrogance she always carried. "Honestly, Sophia, I thought you'd be in a better place by now. A manager at a restaurant?" She laughed. "You really downgraded, didn't you?" Daniel shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "I always told you that you wouldn't survive without me. Look at you now, running around like a waitress in someone else's business." I could have responded right then, but I didn't. Instead, I just smiled, a calmness washing over me as I signaled one of my staff members. Within seconds, a waiter approached, holding a tray with 2 glasses of chilled water. "For our special guests," I said softly. The waiter handed them the glasses, and before they could react, he tipped them forward, spilling the ice-cold water onto their expensive designer outfits. A collective gasp spread through the room as Daniel and Emma stumbled back, their shocked expressions priceless. "What the hell's?" Emma shrieked, looking down at her drenched dress. Daniel wiped his face angrily. "Are you out of your mind?" I tilted my head, my smile never fading. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you both needed to cool off." Emma's face turned red with rage. "You," she started, but then her expression shifted as something clicked in her mind. I watched as she looked around, really looked at how the staff reacted to me, at how I carried myself, at how no one reprimanded me for what had just happened. Realization dawned on her face, followed closely by pure shock. "Wait a minute," she whispered. She turned to Daniel, who was still too busy fuming to put the pieces together. "Sophia, she's not just working here." Daniel's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I let the silence stretch, enjoying the moment. Then I leaned forward slightly. "I don't work here," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I own this place." For a second, neither of them spoke. Their stunned expressions were worth every bit of the pain they had put me through. Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Daniel's smirk had disappeared completely. "That's not possible," Daniel muttered. You were nothing after I left you." "There's no way." I shrugged. "And yet here I am. While you two were busy living in your fantasy, I was out here rebuilding my life, creating something better than anything you could ever imagine." I let my words sink in before delivering the final blow. "And just so you know, I didn't just build a business. I married a man who actually values me. A man who sees my worth and treats me as his equal. My husband, Ryan, owns one of the most successful hotel chains in this city. And as his wife, he made sure I got what I deserved, 2 luxury restaurants under my name." The color drained from their faces. Emma's jealousy was almost tangible, her fists clenched at her sides. Daniel looked like he had swallowed something bitter. They had expected to see me struggling, broken. Instead, they had walked right into the world I had built for myself. One far grander than the life they had stolen from me. "I don't believe this," Emma hissed. "You're lying." I laughed. A genuine, satisfied laugh. "Why would I need to lie? The proof is all around you. Every person in this room knows who I am. This is my world now, Emma. Not yours." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "Sophia, we didn't mean to hurt you. It was a mistake. I made a mistake." His tone had changed now, desperate, almost pleading. "We were young. We were foolish. But you're successful now. You're happy. Isn't that enough?" I saw it then, the regret in his eyes. Not regret for what he had done, but regret that I had risen above it. He wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was sorry that his betrayal hadn't destroyed me. Emma, however, was seething. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" she spat. "You think just because you got lucky—" I cut her off, my voice sharper this time. "Luck had nothing to do with it. Everything I have, I built with my own hands. I worked for it. Unlike you, Emma, I don't need to manipulate and steal to get what I want." She took a step forward, but before she could say another word, I lifted a hand. "I think we're done here. Security?" Two guards immediately stepped forward, their expressions blank but ready. Daniel's eyes widened. "Wait, what are you doing?" I crossed my arms. "Escorting you out. I don't allow filth in my establishment." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "You can't just throw us out." I smiled. "I can. And I am." The guards moved in, taking them both by the arms. Daniel resisted for a moment, but Emma was too stunned to fight back. "Sophia, please." Daniel tried one last time. "We can talk about this. We made mistakes, but we're still family." I stared at him, feeling nothing but satisfaction. "You stopped being my family the day you betrayed me." And with that, I turned my back on them. The doors swung open, and as they were dragged out into the cold night, I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. The past had finally been dealt with, but I wasn't done just yet. I had one last move to make, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. Sophia let out a slow breath, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. There was a moment of silence before she continued, her voice steady, but laced with finality. "I could have let it end there. Kicking them out of my restaurant was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. Not after everything they had done to me. They had stolen years of my life, left me to suffer while they built their perfect world on top of my pain. And now it was my turn." After that night, I made a few calls. I had kept track of Daniel and Emma, even when I didn't think I would ever need to cross paths with them again. Old habits, I suppose. And what I found out was interesting. Daniel's businesses weren't doing as well as they used to. The market had changed, and without someone like me to help him manage things, cracks had started forming. His investments weren't as smart as he believed, and his partners? Well, let's just say they were losing confidence in him. As for Emma, she was exactly where I expected her to be, playing the role of a perfect wife, clinging to the man she had stolen, thinking that his money would keep her safe forever. They were still living comfortably, but I saw the signs. The desperation. The slow decline. It was only a matter of time before everything they had built started to crumble. And I decided to give fate a little push. Through Ryan's connections, I made sure word spread in the right circles about Daniel's instability as a businessman. Rumors, doubts, the kind of whispers that made investors nervous. I didn't have to lie, his mistakes were real. I just made sure people noticed them. One by one, his deals started falling apart. His credibility? Shattered. His business? Hanging by a thread. But that wasn't enough. I had something else planned. Something more personal. It happened on a quiet evening. I received a message. Daniel wanted to meet. Desperation had finally driven him to me. I agreed, choosing a private lounge in one of my hotels. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting at the far end of the dimly lit room. He looked different, tired, older, the weight of his failures dragging him down. "Sophia," he said as I approached. His voice had lost that arrogant edge. "Thank you for meeting me." I sat across from him, crossing my legs calmly. What do you want, Daniel? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I need help. He hesitated before adding, From you? I raised an eyebrow. Help? From the woman you abandoned? The woman you humiliated?
His jaw tightened.
I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But things are difficult right now. Business isn't what it used to be. Investors are backing out, and I just need someone with your experience. I laughed, shaking my head. Let me guess. Emma doesn't know how to fix your mess, does she? His expression darkened, but he didn't deny it. I leaned forward slightly. You had everything, Daniel. A wife who loved you, a successful business, a stable life. And you threw it all away for my stepsister. Now you want me to fix the mess you made? Tell me, why would I ever help you? His lips parted, but before he could respond, the doors opened. Emma walked in, looking like she had seen a ghost. Her eyes darted between me and Daniel, suspicion clouding her face.
What's going on? She demanded.
I smiled. Your husband asked me for help. Seems like things aren't going so well in your little paradise. Her face twisted in anger.
You think you're so smart, don't you?
You think you've won. I stood up, adjusting my coat. Emma, I won the moment you betrayed me. Everything you did to break me only made me stronger. And now you're both drowning in the mess you created. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Sophia, please. I cut him off with a raised hand. No, Daniel. You made your choices. Now you live with them. As I turned to leave, I made one last move, the final stroke of my revenge. I pulled out my phone and pressed a button. Within moments, the doors swung open again. This time, 2 police officers stepped inside. Emma's face went pale. What is this? I turned back, my smile cold. Justice. Daniel shot up from his seat. What the hell is going on? I handed the officers a folder. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, the list is long. You thought you could cheat your way through business, Daniel, but the law doesn't work that way. Emma stumbled back. This is a mistake. You can't do this. I tilted my head. Oh, but I can. And I just did. The officers stepped forward, reading Daniel his rights as they handcuffed him. Emma tried to fight, but it was no use. Her perfect world had come crashing down around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. As they were led away, Daniel turned back one last time, his face filled with regret. Sophia, I'm sorry, but his apology meant nothing. I walked out of the lounge, stepping into the cool night air, feeling lighter than I had in years. The past was finally behind me. The pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak. It no longer held any power over me. I had rebuilt my life. I had found love again. And most importantly, I had gotten the justice I deserved. They say karma works in mysterious ways, but I prefer to think of it as balance. And tonight, everything was exactly where it was meant to be. My husband divorced me on our honeymoon. I shouted, "How dare you do this?" My mother-in-law slapped me hard and said, "In my family, there is no space for a cheap girl." They abandoned me and left the place. But I took a bold step, and before they arrived home, a shocking surprise awaited them. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how I was betrayed by the man I loved, humiliated by his family, and left alone to suffer, only to rise stronger than ever. I met Daniel during my college years in Los Angeles, California. He was charming, intelligent, and full of life. From the very beginning, he made me feel like I was the most special person in the world. We spent countless evenings studying together, laughing over coffee, and making plans for the future. Daniel wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my best friend, my safe place, and my greatest love. When he proposed to me after 5 years of being together, I didn't hesitate to say yes. I was ecstatic. But there was just one problem: his mother, Margaret. Margaret was never happy about our relationship. She saw me as someone beneath her family status. "A girl like you has nothing to offer, Daniel," she once told me coldly when we first met. It didn't matter that I had a stable career or that I truly loved her son. To her, I was a nobody. But Daniel always reassured me. Don't worry about her, he would say, holding my hand. She'll come around eventually. I love you, and that's all that matters. I believed him. I trusted him. Despite Margaret's disapproval, we got married. At first, it felt like a dream. Daniel and I moved into a beautiful apartment, and life seemed perfect. But the illusion didn't last long. Margaret would visit constantly, uninvited. Every time she came over, she would comment on everything I did. You don't even know how to take care of a house properly, she would say while inspecting my kitchen. Or worse, she would say things like, a woman's real value is measured by her wealth. Love doesn't pay the bills. I knew she didn't like me, but I never expected what she had planned next. A month after our wedding, Daniel and I planned our honeymoon trip. It was supposed to be our first real escape, just the two of us, away from everything. I was beyond excited. For once, it would be just Daniel and me, no interference, no tension. But the night before we were set to leave, Margaret made an unbelievable announcement. I'm coming with you, she said casually over dinner, sipping her wine like it was the most natural thing in the world. I nearly choked on my food. What? Daniel didn't even look at me. He just sighed and said, Mom, are you sure? I mean, this is our honeymoon. Of course, I'm sure, Margaret replied, setting down her glass. It's been so long since I traveled, and I think we'll have much more fun together as a family. A part of me expected Daniel to say no,
To stand up for me.
but he didn't. He just nodded and said, I guess it'll be fine, Elena. Let's not make a big deal out of it. Not make a big deal out of it?
I felt like someone had punched me in the chest.
This was supposed to be about us, not Margaret. Why was she always in our marriage? But I stayed quiet. I had spent so long trying to keep the peace that I swallowed my anger and convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be that bad. I was so wrong. When we reached our honeymoon destination, something felt off. Daniel was acting nervous, checking his phone constantly. And then, at the airport, a young woman was waiting for us. She was beautiful, confident, and well-dressed. A woman who clearly belonged to the world Margaret admired. Sophia, you're here. Margaret greeted her warmly, hugging her like an old friend. Sophia smiled, glancing at me briefly before focusing on Daniel. Finally, we meet in person, she said, her voice dripping with familiarity. I looked at Daniel, confused.
Who is she?
Why was she acting like she knew my husband? And then Margaret turned to me, her eyes cold and cruel. Elena, this is Sophia, she said, her lips curling into a smirk. She's going to be Daniel's new wife. The world stopped. I stared at them, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. What are you talking about? I managed to whisper, feeling my hands shake. Margaret let out a small laugh. Oh, sweetheart, don't act surprised. Did you really think you were going to stay in this family forever? I turned to Daniel, desperate, begging with my eyes for him to tell me this was a mistake. Daniel, tell me this is a joke, I pleaded. Tell me she's lying. He looked away. I'm sorry, Elena, he muttered, avoiding my gaze. But I don't have a choice. My entire world shattered. I stepped back, feeling like I couldn't breathe. You don't have a choice? I repeated, my voice shaking. What does that even mean? That's when Margaret delivered the final blow. It means that if he doesn't divorce you and marry Sophia, he's out of the family business. No money. No power. Nothing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own husband, my Daniel, was choosing money over me. I couldn't hold back my tears. How could you? I whispered. How could you do this to me, Daniel? Before I could say another word, Margaret slapped me. Hard. I gasped, my face burning from the force of it. Shut your mouth, she hissed. You are nothing. You were never good enough for us. Daniel still said nothing. He just stood there as his mother humiliated me, as if he had already made his decision. Sign the divorce papers, Daniel, Margaret instructed. And then, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience, my husband took the papers and signed them. Just like that, our marriage was over. Sophia smiled, taking Daniel's arm like she had won a prize. Come on, darling, she purred. We have a wedding to plan. I watched as they got into the car, leaving me standing there, alone, broken, discarded. Margaret rolled down the window one last time, sneering. There's no place for cheap girls like you in our family. Then they drove away. I stood there, my heart ripped apart, my world completely shattered. But as the tears fell down my face, something inside me changed. They thought they could break me. They thought they could walk away, without consequences. They had no idea who they were messing with. And that was the moment I decided I was going to get revenge. I stood frozen, watching the car disappear into the distance. My own husband, the man I trusted, had betrayed me in the most humiliating way possible. Margaret's cruel words echoed in my mind, and my cheek still burned from her slap. I felt numb, as if my body had given up on feeling anything at all. For a while, I just stood there, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. The man who once held me in his arms and promised to love me forever had left me like I was nothing. Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to breathe. The world around me blurred, my legs weak beneath me. I was alone. Truly alone. I didn't know how long I stood there until I finally forced myself to move. I needed to get out of there, away from the place where my life had just been torn apart. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person I knew would stand by me no matter what. Ryan, my younger brother. Elena? His voice was sharp with concern the moment he picked up. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. A choked sob escaped instead. Elena, what happened? Are you okay? I inhaled shakily, my voice barely above a whisper. He left me, Ryan. Daniel left me for someone else. There was a long silence. Then, in a low, controlled voice, Ryan asked, "Where are you?" I gave him the address, and before I could even say anything else, he said, "Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." By the time Ryan arrived, I had collapsed onto a bench outside the airport, staring blankly ahead. The moment I saw him, I felt everything hit me at once. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the sheer humiliation of being abandoned so easily. Ryan crouched in front of me, gripping my shoulders. "Tell me everything." Through my sobs, I told him what happened. How Margaret had orchestrated everything. How she had found a wealthy businesswoman for Daniel to marry. How Daniel had chosen money and power over me. How he had signed the divorce papers right in front of me and left without a second thought. Ryan's jaw clenched as he listened, his hands tightening into fists. That bastard. That absolute bastard. I wiped my face, my voice hollow. What am I supposed to do now? He destroyed me, Ryan. He took everything from me and walked away like I was nothing. Ryan took a deep breath, his expression turning dangerously calm. "You're not going to sit here and cry, that's for sure. You're going to fight back." I frowned. Fight back? How? Ryan's eyes burned with determination. "We're going to find out everything about Margaret, Sophia, and Daniel. There's no way they're as perfect as they pretend to be. You think a woman like Sophia just magically appears, and Margaret suddenly decides she's the perfect daughter-in-law? Something doesn't add up." For the first time since this nightmare began, a spark of hope ignited inside me. He was right. Margaret had orchestrated this whole thing too perfectly. There had to be something, some weakness, some secret that could bring them down. Ryan didn't waste time. He called a private investigator that he had worked with before on cases. Within an hour, we had someone digging into Margaret's business, Sophia's past, and Daniel's finances. While we waited for results, Ryan took me back to his house. I sat in his living room, numb but determined. "Do you still love him?" Ryan asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. Did I? The man I loved had vanished the moment I saw who he truly was. I shook my head. I loved the person I thought he was. But that man doesn't exist anymore. Ryan nodded approvingly.
Good.
Because when we take them down, I don't want you hesitating. They wouldn't hesitate to destroy you. A week passed, and the private investigator finally returned with shocking evidence. Margaret wasn't just running a business. She was running an empire built on fraud, illegal dealings, and smuggling. And Sophia? She was involved too. Her entire fortune was tied to dirty money. But the most surprising part? Daniel knew everything. He had been helping them cover up their crimes for years. I felt my breath catch as I read the reports. He was involved this whole time? Ryan nodded grimly. That's why Margaret was so confident. She knew Daniel wouldn't refuse her, because he was already deep in it. If he stepped out of line, she could destroy him too. A slow, cold anger settled inside me. All those years, I thought I was building a future with a good man. Instead, I had been living with a liar. Ryan leaned forward. Elena, it's time. We take this to the authorities. We bring them down. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking. This was it.
My chance to make them pay for what they did to me.
I took a deep breath and nodded. Let's do it. Ryan immediately made the calls. By the end of the day, the police had everything they needed. A plan was put into motion. A raid was scheduled. Soon, we would have them trapped with no way out. The night before the operation, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I had been weak before. A victim.
But now?
Now I was ready. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. The morning of the raid arrived, and I stood by Ryan's side, watching as the police finalized their preparations. My heart pounded in my chest, but this time, it wasn't from fear or heartbreak. It was from something stronger, determination. For so long, I had felt powerless, but today, that was going to change. Today, Daniel, Margaret, and Sophia would face the consequences of their greed and betrayal. Ryan handed me a cup of coffee, his expression serious. You okay? I nodded. I will be after today. The police had everything planned perfectly. Their targets, Daniel, Margaret, and Sophia, had no idea that the warehouse where they conducted their illegal dealings was already under surveillance. The authorities had enough evidence to charge them with fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Ryan and I were stationed at a safe distance, watching as undercover officers moved into position. My fingers tightened around my cup as I thought about the people I once considered family. Margaret had stolen my husband from me, Sophia had taken my place, and Daniel had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Now they were about to pay for it all. Moments later, a sleek black car pulled up outside the warehouse. Even from a distance, I recognized the figures stepping out. Margaret, Sophia, and Daniel. Sophia walked ahead confidently, her designer heels clicking against the pavement, while Margaret whispered something to her. Daniel trailed behind them, looking anxious. They have no idea what's coming, Ryan muttered beside me. I watched as they entered the warehouse, the doors shutting behind them. A few minutes later, the police moved in. Sirens blared, and the officers stormed inside, surrounding them before they could even react. Through the surveillance footage on a nearby monitor, I saw Margaret's eyes widen in shock, Sophia frozen in place, and Daniel looking around in a panic. The officers shouted commands, forcing them to the ground. Margaret tried to argue, but it was useless. She was handcuffed within seconds. Sophia screamed in protest, and Daniel, he just looked terrified. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. This was what they deserved. The next few hours passed in a blur. Daniel, Margaret, and Sophia were taken into custody, and the police gathered more evidence from the warehouse. Ryan and I were asked to come to the station to provide statements, and I found myself staring at the glass windows separating us from the holding cells. I watched as Margaret sat stiffly, her face pale. Sophia paced back and forth, cursing under her breath, and Daniel sat hunched over, his head in his hands. I didn't feel sorry for any of them. A police officer approached me. Would you like to speak with them before the trial? I hesitated, but then nodded. I wanted to look them in the eyes one last time. Ryan gave me a warning look. Don't let them get to you. I took a deep breath before stepping into the room where Daniel was being held. As soon as he saw me, he stood up, his expression desperate. Elena, you did this? I crossed my arms, my voice steady. You did this to yourself, Daniel. His face twisted in frustration. You don't understand. Margaret forced me into everything. I had no choice. I let out a short laugh. No choice? That's funny, because I remember you having a choice the day you signed our divorce papers and left me standing alone. He flinched. I took a step closer, my voice lower. You were a part of this from the beginning, weren't you? You knew exactly what Margaret and Sophia were involved in. You didn't just betray me. You sold your own soul for money. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, looking frantic. I can fix this. We can start over. Please, Elena, you don't understand what's going to happen to me in here. I stared at him, feeling nothing but disgust. You should have thought about that before you ruined my life. I turned to leave, but before I walked out the door, I looked back at him one last time. Good luck, Daniel. You're going to need it. As I walked away, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Margaret and Sophia didn't even deserve a conversation. They had made it clear long ago that I meant nothing to them, and now they meant nothing to me. The day of the trial came faster than I expected. The courtroom was filled with people, reporters, former business associates, and employees who had once admired Margaret's empire. Now, they were all here to watch it crumble. Ryan sat beside me as the charges were read.
Fraud.
Money laundering. Conspiracy. One by one, the evidence was presented: bank records, intercepted messages, surveillance footage. There was no way out for them. When the judge finally spoke, his voice rang through the silent courtroom. The defendants are found guilty on all charges. There was a loud murmur in the room as the verdict sank in. Daniel turned in his seat to look at me, his eyes filled with desperation. Elena, please. I simply smiled. Tit for tat, Daniel. Margaret's face was red with fury, and Sophia's arrogant expression had completely disappeared. The final sentences were announced. Years in prison. No way out. No more power, no more wealth. Just consequences. I took a deep breath, letting it all sink in. The nightmare was finally over. I had won. As I stepped out of the courtroom, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The people who had betrayed me, humiliated me, and left me broken were finally facing the consequences of their actions. Justice had been served. Ryan walked beside me, hands in his pockets, watching my face carefully. How do you feel? He asked. I let out a slow breath. Free. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. No more heartbreak. No more looking over my shoulder. No more feeling like I wasn't enough. I had spent so much time wondering if I had made a mistake by marrying Daniel, if there was something I could have done differently. But standing here, watching him being taken away in handcuffs, I realized something important. I was never the problem. Margaret had always hated me. Daniel had always been weak. And Sophia had been waiting for an opportunity. They had destroyed themselves. I had only helped to reveal the truth. Ryan and I walked out of the courthouse, past the reporters, past the whispers of people who once admired Daniel's family. None of them mattered anymore. As soon as we got outside, Ryan pulled out his phone. Come on, we need to celebrate. Where do you want to go? I laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. Anywhere that serves strong drinks and good food. That night, we sat in a restaurant, talking about everything except what had happened. For once, I wasn't thinking about Daniel. I wasn't thinking about Margaret, Sophia, or the betrayal. I was thinking about the future. My future. Over the next few weeks, my life slowly started falling back into place. I moved into my own apartment, one that belonged to me and no one else. I started focusing on my career again, rebuilding the dreams that had been put on hold because of my marriage. Daniel had once told me that I was nothing without him, but the truth was I was better without him. Margaret and Sophia had thought they could destroy me. Instead, I had watched them destroy themselves. Every now and then, I would hear updates about Daniel. He was struggling in prison, cut off from the luxury he had once enjoyed. His old business partners had turned against him, and with Margaret and Sophia locked up, he had no one left to protect him. Ryan and I would hear rumors, how he begged former friends for help, how he regretted everything, how he wished he had never left me. But I didn't care. I had wasted enough time caring about Daniel. One day, as I was leaving work, my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hellos. There was silence on the other end. Then, A voice I hadn't heard in a long time. "Elena, it's me." I stopped walking. The voice was hoarse, weaker than I remembered, but I knew exactly who it was.
Daniel.
I clenched my jaw. "What do you want?" There was a long pause. I just wanted to hear your voice. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, pity, disbelief. He sounded broken, desperate. But I wasn't the same woman he had abandoned. I wasn't the same woman who had begged him not to leave. I had no more tears for him. "It's too late for that, Daniel." He sighed, and for the first time, I could hear regret. Real regret. "I lost everything, Elena." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "You lost me. And that should have been enough to stop you from making the choices you did." He didn't respond. He knew it was true. After a long silence, he finally whispered, "Do you think we could ever fix this?" I almost laughed. Fix this? After everything? I shook my head. "No, Daniel. We're beyond fixing." Before he could say anything else, I hung up the phone. And just like that, I closed the last door to my past. From that day forward, I never looked back. I had survived. I had won. And now I was finally free. My greedy husband brought his new mistress, and together, they plotted to end my life and take over my $2.5 million. When I retaliated, they locked me in a room and prepared to set it on fire. I immediately called the police. But before they arrived, a shocking surprise awaited them. My name is Sophia Anderson, and for most of my life, I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I'm 35, a doctor living in Chicago, and for 8 years, I thought I had a marriage built on trust and mutual respect. My husband, Ryan, was my partner in every sense of the word, or so I thought. He's 38, an entrepreneur with grand ideas and ambitions. Together, we had built a comfortable life. Or, at least, that's the illusion I clung to. Looking back now, there were signs, subtle ones, whispers of something not quite right. But when you're in love, it's easy to explain things away. Late-night business meetings? Ryan was just working hard for our future. Money missing from our joint account? He said it was temporary, a necessary investment for his business. I trusted him implicitly. I believed in our marriage, in him. It all began to unravel one evening, a quiet Sunday when Ryan was out. I was sorting through some paperwork in our home office, looking for an insurance document, when I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see, a bank statement for an account I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as I read through the numbers, my stomach twisted. There were transfers, large ones, totaling nearly $2.5 million. The dates and amounts didn't match anything we had discussed, and the name on the receiving account was unfamiliar, Amanda Blake. I sat there, staring at the paper, my mind racing.
Who was Amanda Blake?
Why was Ryan sending her money, our money? For a moment, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was business-related, I thought. But deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. The next few days were a blur of confusion and denial. I couldn't bring myself to confront Ryan outright. Instead, I played the role of the supportive wife, all the while keeping my eyes open. And then I found more emails, receipts, and pictures. Amanda was no business associate. She was his mistress, a 28-year-old event planner who appeared to be living the high life, funded by my husband's deceit. The extravagant trips, designer clothes, and luxury apartment? All courtesy of Ryan. But the worst discovery came when I realized this wasn't just about infidelity. Ryan wasn't just betraying me emotionally, he was planning to leave me with nothing. Every financial move he made was calculated, siphoning money from our accounts, putting everything in his name, and ensuring that when he walked away, I'd be left with scraps. My entire future, everything I had worked for, was being stolen right under my nose. I couldn't cry, not at first. The anger was too raw, too overwhelming. I felt like a fool, like my entire life had been a lie. But as the initial shock wore off, I knew I couldn't let him win. I wasn't going to sit back and watch him destroy me. If Ryan wanted a fight, he was going to get one. I started small, careful not to tip him off. During the day, I continued my work at the hospital, saving lives and pretending everything was fine. At night, I became a different person, quietly gathering evidence, piecing together the full extent of Ryan's betrayal. I learned to hack into his accounts, uncovering more than I ever expected. It wasn't just our joint assets he was draining. Ryan was involved in something far bigger: fraudulent activities, money laundering, even tax evasion. The money he was funneling to Amanda wasn't just ours. It was dirty money, the kind that could destroy his entire business and land him in prison. I felt sick, but also a strange sense of power. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't the clueless wife anymore. I had the upper hand. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous Ryan's schemes seemed. I needed help. That's when I reached out to Detective James Carter, a seasoned officer specializing in financial crimes. I remember sitting across from him in a small, dimly lit office, clutching the folder of evidence I had gathered. "I need your help," I told him, my voice trembling but firm. "My husband, he's stealing from me, and I think he's breaking the laws." Detective Carter listened patiently as I laid it all out: the secret account, the mistress, the fraudulent activities. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. When I finished, he leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sophia, this is bigger than you realize. If what you're saying is true, your husband could be facing serious prison time. But you need to be careful. Men like this don't go down without a fight." His words sent a chill through me, but I nodded. I was ready. I had to be. There was no turning back now. Over the next few weeks, we worked together in secret, building a case against Ryan. I installed software on his laptop to track his activity, recorded phone calls, and even pretended to support his latest business venture to get closer to the truth. It was exhausting, living this double life, but I didn't have a choice. Ryan, oblivious to my plans, continued his charade. He smiled at me over dinner, talked about our future, and even had the audacity to bring Amanda into our home when he thought I was working late. I stayed quiet, biding my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. But I knew that moment wouldn't come easily. Ryan wasn't stupid, and the closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous he became. I could feel it, a tension growing between us, an unspoken suspicion in his eyes. He didn't know what I was up to yet. But he was starting to sense that I wasn't the naive, trusting wife he had built his plans around. And that's when I realized the true extent of what I was up against. Ryan wasn't just my husband. He was my enemy. And I was about to go to war. When you live with someone for 8 years, you get to know their rhythms, the little habits, routines, and quirks that make up daily life. But in those weeks after discovering Ryan's betrayal, I saw him in an entirely different light. Every smile, every casual comment, every touch felt like a mask hiding the monster underneath. And the hardest part? I had to wear a mask of my own. I continued gathering evidence with Detective Carter, all while pretending nothing had changed. Some nights I would sit at the dinner table, nodding along to Ryan's stories about clients and deals, knowing full well those clients didn't exist, and those deals were just money being funneled into Amanda's lifestyle. Ryan thought he was untouchable. He'd always been charming, the kind of man who could walk into a room and instantly win people over. That charm had fooled me for years, and now I realized it wasn't just me. He had fooled everyone. His colleagues, his friends, even our families. He was a master manipulator, and I was determined to beat him at his own game. But it wasn't easy. The more evidence I gathered, the more dangerous it became. Ryan was meticulous, always covering his tracks, and any slip on my part could have been disastrous. I couldn't afford to let him suspect anything, not yet. So, I played the role of the supportive wife perfectly, even as my anger simmered beneath the surface. One night, while Ryan was out on another one of his business meetings, I broke into his study. My hands trembled as I searched through his desk, his files, his computer. That's when I found it, the ledger. It was hidden in a locked drawer, buried under a stack of old documents. Inside, every transaction was meticulously recorded. The transfers to Amanda, the offshore accounts, the shell companies he used to launder money. It was all there. I took pictures of every page, my heart pounding with each snap of the camera. This was the smoking gun, the proof I needed to take him down. But it wasn't just the money. As I flipped through the pages, I found names, business associates, clients, even politicians, people tied to Ryan's schemes. It wasn't just about me anymore. Ryan was part of something much bigger, something dangerous. The weight of it all hit me that night as I sat alone in our bedroom, staring at the evidence I had collected. This wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a web of lies and crimes that could destroy lives. And I was in the middle of it. The next day, I met with Detective Carter. "This is more than just financial fraud," I told him, handing over the photos of the ledger. "Ryan's connected to people, powerful people. If we're going to take him down, we need to be careful." Carter nodded, his expression grim. "You've done incredible work, Sophia. But you're right. This isn't just about your husband anymore. We're going to need a solid plan, and you need to be prepared for the fallout." The fallout. Those words stayed with me. As much as I hated Ryan, part of me still struggled with the idea of what I was about to do. This was the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with. Exposing him meant destroying everything we had, everything I thought we stood for. But there was no other way. He had made his choices, and now he had to face the consequences. As Carter and his team worked on their end, I focused on keeping up appearances. It wasn't easy. Ryan was growing more suspicious, watching me more closely. He'd ask questions about my work, my schedule, even my mood. "You've been distant lately," he said one night, his eyes narrowing as he studied me. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile, pretending to be hurt. "You're the one who's always busy, Ryan. I barely see you these days. Maybe I'm just feeling lonely." It worked for the moment, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't convinced, and I knew I had to be more careful. The tension between us reached a boiling point a few days later. Ryan came home unexpectedly in the middle of the day, catching me off guard as I was going through his laptop. I barely had time to close it before he walked into the room. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Just checking emails," I lied, my heart racing. "The hospital's been sending updates about the new schedule." He didn't respond, just stared at me for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked over and took the laptop from me. My hands clenched into fists as I watched him. He didn't say anything, but his silence spoke volumes. He was suspicious, and I had just made things worse. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, every creak of the house made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan was watching me, waiting for me to slip up again. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I found out he had brought Amanda into our home. I came home from a late shift at the hospital to find a pair of unfamiliar heels by the front door. My stomach dropped as I heard voices, Ryan's deep and familiar and a woman's, soft and flirtatious. I froze in the hallway, listening as they laughed together in the living room. For a moment, I wanted to storm in, to scream at them both, to tear the whole charade apart. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around and walked out the door, my hands shaking with rage. I couldn't let them see me like this, not yet. When I finally got home hours later, the house was empty, and Ryan was in bed, pretending to be asleep. I stood in the doorway, staring at him, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and fear. He didn't know it yet, but his time was running out. The game we were playing was dangerous, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came to a head. But I wasn't going to back down. I had come too far to stop now. Ryan thought he was untouchable, but he was wrong. And I was going to prove it. The night I came home to find Amanda's shoes in my house was a turning point. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the audacity. Ryan didn't even bother to hide it anymore. He was bringing his mistress into our home, the place we had built together. That night, as I stood in the cold outside our house, I made a decision. This had to end. And it had to end soon. Detective Carter had warned me to be careful, and he was right. Ryan's behavior was becoming more erratic. He was on edge, his temper flaring at the smallest things. One morning, he snapped at me over breakfast because the coffee was too hot. "You can't even do this right, Sophia," he muttered, slamming his mug down. I didn't react. I couldn't afford to. But inside I was seething. I knew the walls were closing in on him. The investigation was gaining momentum, and Carter's team was preparing to move. We had everything we needed: the ledger, the transfers, the evidence of fraud. The plan was simple: catch Ryan red-handed, with no room for escape. But I hadn't anticipated how dangerous he would become as the noose tightened. One evening, Ryan came home earlier than usual. His face was flushed, his movements frantic. He stormed into the living room, where I was reading, and threw a folder onto the coffee table. "Explain this," he demanded. I looked down and saw a printout of my recent phone records. My stomach sank. He had seen the calls to Detective Carter. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Don't lie to me, Sophia," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "I know you've been talking to someone. Who is it? A lawyer? A private investigator? Do you think you're smarter than me?" His words sent a chill through me, but I refused to show fear. "You're paranoid, Ryan," I said calmly. "Maybe if you spent less time sneaking around with Amanda, you'd realize how ridiculous you sound." For a moment, he was stunned into silence. Then his face twisted in rage. "You think you can play games with me?" he shouted, stepping closer. "You think you're going to win?" Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "You don't know who you're dealing with, Sophia," he said, his voice cold and venomous. "You've made the biggest mistake of your life." I managed to pull away and ran to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. My heart was pounding as I dialed Carter's number. "It's happening," I whispered, my voice shaking. "He knows. I think he's going to hurt me." Carter's response was immediate. "Stay locked in that room. We're coming." The minutes felt like hours as I waited, listening to Ryan pacing outside the door, shouting threats. When I finally heard the sound of sirens, relief flooded through me. The police burst in, arresting Ryan before he could do any more harm. As they led him away, his eyes met mine, filled with fury and disbelief. "You'll regret this, Sophia," he spat. "I swear, you'll regret it." But I didn't regret it. Not for a second. For the first time in months, I felt safe. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. The moment Ryan was taken away in handcuffs should have felt like the end of the nightmare. But as I watched him being driven off, his threats still ringing in my ears, I knew this was far from over. The web of lies he had spun was too vast, too tangled, to unravel in one single night. My fight wasn't finished. It was just shifting to a new battleground. Detective Carter and his team wasted no time. With Ryan in custody, they raided his business offices and uncovered even more than we had anticipated. Hidden accounts, forged documents, and ties to an underground network of illegal activities came to light. Ryan hadn't just been siphoning money for Amanda's luxurious lifestyle. He had been laundering money for some very dangerous people. His entire empire was built on deceit and crime. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt a strange emptiness. This was the man I had loved, the man I had once dreamed of building a life with. Now, everything about him was a lie. The house we shared, the vacations, the laughter, it all felt tainted. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. The legal process was swift, and I had a role to play. The trial was a spectacle. Ryan's crimes shocked everyone. Our friends, our families, even Amanda. She showed up on the first day, dressed in designer clothes, looking every bit the part of the mistress who had thought she was winning. But as the evidence mounted, her smug demeanor crumbled. She wasn't just a pawn in Ryan's schemes. She was a willing participant, and she, too, faced consequences for her involvement. I testified in court, laying out everything I had discovered. It wasn't easy, standing there under the weight of Ryan's gaze, his fury palpable even from across the room. He refused to look at me most of the time, but when he did, his eyes were filled with hatred. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't remorseful. He was only angry that he had been caught. The judge didn't hold back. Ryan was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and Amanda received her punishment as well. But it wasn't just about their crimes. It was about the lives they had destroyed. Ryan's business associates were implicated, employees lost their jobs, and families were affected. The fallout was immense, but justice had been served. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. The media frenzy around the case meant I couldn't escape the whispers, the stares. People treated me like a victim, and in a way, I was. But I refused to let that define me. I had survived and I had fought back. That was what mattered. With the help of a good lawyer, I recovered most of the stolen assets. Ryan had tried to leave me penniless, but in the end, his plans failed. I sold the house, the one that had become a symbol of betrayal, and moved into a cozy apartment downtown. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, a place where I could start fresh. Detective Carter became a surprising source of support during this time. He reminded me that what I had done, standing up, fighting back, was no small feat. Most people wouldn't have had the courage to do what you did, he told me one afternoon. You not only saved yourself, but you helped us uncover something far bigger. His words stayed with me. For so long, I had felt powerless, like a pawn in Ryan's twisted game. But I had taken that power back, piece by piece, until it was mine again. One day, as I sat in my new home, sipping coffee and looking out at the city, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The scars Ryan had left, emotional and physical, were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to move forward. Ryan's arrest had been the climax, but my story didn't end there. It was a story of betrayal, yes, but also of resilience and justice. It was about refusing to be a victim, about fighting for the truth even when it seemed impossible. And, in the end, it was about reclaiming my life. I often think about what I would say to the woman I was before all of this, naive, trusting, blind to the cracks in her world. I would tell her that betrayal doesn't have to break you, that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest strength, and that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way to fight back. Because that's what I did. I fought, and I won.